Good afternoon, everyone. Can I welcome members and the Mayor to this London Assembly Mayor's Question Time. And let's go to the agenda. Item 1, apologies.
We have apologies for absence, Chair, from Assembly members Bacon, McCartney and Curtin.
Thank you. Assembly Member Cooper will be joining us later. Can I welcome to the public gallery students from Israel and the new Associate School of Journalism and members from the Young Ambassador School, Israeli Centre for Young Leaders. Just briefly provide you with an update on recent Assembly activities. Just to say on the behalf of the Assembly, I was at this morning's service at St Paul's, London, for the Grenfell Tower National Memorial Service. I think never a service was there like this, that the bereaved showed such dignity, and the Mayor was present and others, and I'm sure we all want to send our heartfelt well-being to all the bereaved relatives and friends today and in the future. Yesterday, Assembly members were at the Budget and Performance Committee and published its annual pre-budget report, and that's out there for people to respond to and to be aware of. Our work on Brexit continues. Last week, the Assembly published its third Brexit directives. This last letter was published by our Police and Crime Committee, and in it, Assembly Member O'Connell urges the Mayor to press in his discussion with the Brexit Secretary, the Right Honourable David Davis MP, for greater clarity on the government's ambitions for law enforcement and justice following Brexit. We welcome the Mayor's announcement of his intention to commission independent analysis of the impact of Brexit on London's economy. We flagged this up in our Brexit Directive 2. We said in that document that we needed a plan of action that would give the capital and the financial markets reassurance, and we look forward to the results of this research. Can I then go on to declaration of interest? Can I ask the Assembly to note the recommendations set out at item 2? Can I ask the Assembly to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interest or other relevant interests where they relate to items on the agenda for today's meeting? Item 3, minutes. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the minutes of the London Assembly plenary meeting held on 2nd November 2017 and the Mayor's Question Time meeting held on 16th November 2017 as accurate records? Thank you. Item 4, the Mayor's report. Can I ask the Assembly formally to receive the Mayor's report covering the period from 3rd November to 30th November, and that we now will listen to the Mayor, who will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes in length on matters occurring since the publication of his report. And Mr. Mayor, there has been one request for an oral update, and that's in the name of Assembly Member Pigeon, and that is regarding the actions that TfL will now be taking following the publication of the Rail Accident Investigation Branch RAIB report on Thursday, 7th December 2017, relating to the Croydon tram crash. Thank you.
This morning, the Chair of the London Assembly and I attended the Grenfell National Memorial at St Paul's Cathedral, where we remember the 71 lives so tragically lost in the Grenfell Tower fire 6 months ago. The innocent victims, young, old, children, parents, grandparents, friends and loved ones. Survivors are still grieving and traumatised. Many will still be homeless this Christmas, and the community remains justifiably angry and frustrated. I share their anger and will continue to fight to ensure that they get justice as quickly as possible. Today was about remembering the many Londoners we lost that night, about the families and friends who missed them so desperately. I'm sure I speak for all Londoners and the Assembly when I say that our thoughts and prayers are with them. I've today launched my plans to establish creative enterprise zones across the capital to ensure that artists, creative talent and communities can thrive. We simply cannot afford to lose our artists and creative businesses. They power our economy and make a huge contribution to London's reputation as an open, creative and diverse city. This success is largely thanks to our wealth of creative talent. My creative enterprise zones will give the creative industries the boost they need, as well as supporting businesses, provide jobs and will position London as a world leader for culture and creativity into the future. Last week, over 6 days, I and a delegation of brilliant London businesses visited 6 cities across India and Pakistan. We met with Indian and Pakistani businesses and key government decision makers. The links made will yield more jobs, growth and investment for our capital and will strengthen and deepen the bonds that already exist between our countries. I'm now taking control of the London Stadium, following on from the results of the Moore-Stevens review I commissioned into the stadium's finances. What was presented in the findings was simply staggering. Not for the first time, it revealed a bungled decision-making process that had the previous mayor's fingerprints all over it. He failed to properly examine the transformation costs or the entirely inadequate estimates for moving the retractable seats, which leaves us squarely in the dire financial situation we're now in. By taking over control of the London Stadium, I can try and negotiate deals and minimise ongoing losses to get the best deal for London taxpayers. This week, I launched my economic development strategy, which sets out how I will help to ensure that all Londoners share in the benefits of London's prosperity as it grows. Within this, there is a package of new initiatives which will support entrepreneurs and help small businesses across London to grow and flourish, including plans for a new £100 million fund to help small businesses in the capital. The initiative includes support for those of Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds to boost science ambitions and access business finance. As you said, Chair, I've also been asked to give an oral update on the RAIB report into the Croydon tram crash. My thoughts, Chair, as I'm sure the entire Assembly's are too, remain with those who lost their lives or were injured in the tragedy at Sandilands. TfL continues to do all it can to support everyone affected. Both TfL and I welcome this report from the Rail Accident Investigation Branch. TfL will continue to work alongside them, the Office of Rail and Road, and First Group, who operate the tram network, to ensure all of the recommendations outlined are met. TfL will also be publishing its own independent investigation report in the new year. Since the incident and before the publication of the final RAIB report, TfL has introduced a wide range of additional safety measures to make sure such a tragedy can never happen again. These include a new signage and warning system for drivers, additional speed restrictions, enhanced speed monitoring, and an upgrade of the CCTV recording system. An in-cab driver protection device has been trialled and is now fitted to every tram, meaning that any sign of driver distraction or fatigue results in the driver being alerted immediately. Work to install a system to automatically reduce tram speeds if required is also underway. TfL has enhanced the customer complaints process so that all reports that are managed by one dedicated TfL team and any that relate to safety are prioritised for immediate investigation. And the TfL Sarah Hope line remains available to all those affected and continues to provide help with counselling and other support to anyone who needs it. TfL continues to work with the wider tram industry to ensure that the lessons are learned from this incident and that we introduce any further measures that could improve the safety of trams across the UK.
That's it. Any questions rising for the Mayor? Assembly Member Boff.
Mr Mayor, you referred to the Moore Stevens report. What blame do you put on Tessa Jowl and Ken Livingstone, who were the key decision makers when they thought it was a sensible idea to build an athletics stadium and rejected the football legacy, so starting this sorry process?
I think the question is what blame Moore Stevens, the independent forensic accountants, put on those two, and the answer is none. You'll see the fingers pointed squarely at the former Mayor, your friend Boris Johnson.
Mr Mayor, who was Mayor in 2006 and 7, which Moore Stevens' report established was when the problem started?
Well, you'll be aware Moore Stevens looked at 6 different areas. One of them was the issue of what happens to the stadium after the Olympics. And if memory serves me correctly, I think the Mayor was Ken Livingstone in 2006-7, but if I'm wrong, I'm happy to be corrected.
You got it right. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Any more questions to the Mayor? Assembly Member Whittle.
Yes, Mr Mayor, you mentioned your creative zones there at the beginning, which I welcome. I just wondered if you could give me a brief overview of your creative incentives, if you like, in our schools, which is where it starts. I mean, I know it's a big subject, but what is your general, if you like, overview or your over plan for that at the moment?
Well, firstly, thank you for your I know you've got a long-standing interest in this area. Thank you for meeting with the Deputy Mayor to discuss your ideas. So we're doing a number of things with young people. There's the London curriculum to get them out and about enjoying the city. The music fund, which you know about and support, and have given ideas how to improve giving young people access to the cultural facilities. One of the reasons why we launched the London Borough of Culture was to see if the winning borough could sort of ensure that the children in that borough benefit from that borough being the London Borough of Culture. I recently went to Hull, which is about the size of a borough, and seen the changes that have been made there with the children benefiting from a London Borough of Culture, in that case the UK City of Culture. There's lots of things we're doing that particularly benefit children, and the good news is children have played a big role in some of the submissions made by the boroughs in relation to being awarded the winning London Borough of Culture.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks.
Okay, we finish now with the Mayor's update, so then let's move on to section 5, and that is questions to the Mayor as set out on the priority order paper. And we start with the first question from Assembly Member Whittle, and it's RAF Northolt.
Thank you, Chair. I'm absolutely clear that the role of RAF Northolt should not change and should not be used for more commercial flights. This is reiterated in my new draft London plan, which states that any significant shift in the mix of operations using an airport should be refused. The government has announced that RAF Northolt will close for some months in 2018 to undertake improvements to the runway and extend its life. However, I'm not aware that this is linked to any proposals to increase the number of commercial flights using the airport, nor that any such plans are in development. If the Assembly Member has any information to the contrary, I'd be grateful if he could share this. In light of his question and the public concern, I have written to the Ministry of Defence to seek clarification about the scope of proposed works and seek assurances that this will not permit increased commercial flying. And of course, I'll share the response as soon as I receive it. My formal powers in relation to RAF Northolt are very limited, but I will do what I can to ensure the MOD does not introduce additional commercial flights at the airport. Aviation noise remains a significant concern for hundreds of thousands of Londoners, and I'll continue to make the case for its impact to be fully addressed at all of London's airports, regardless of any expansion.
I hear that you have written to the Ministry of Defence, Mr Mayor, and I'm also pleased to hear that you actually don't think it should be a commercial airport. I think that the question really, which is what I was asking originally, was that there should be a public consultation. I know that you've made representations, but it seems to me that with the history, and I know that Assembly Member Sir Hota has actually talked about this before, is people absolutely being in the dark, the public being completely in the dark as to what's happening, whatever their view. Could you put pressure on to actually have a public consultation too? I mean, could you ask them to do that however they might do it, whether it be by public meeting or whatever?
So, well, as you said, you're one of many Assembly members to raise this issue. Assembly Member Shah, Sahota, Assembly Member Curtin and yourself, and there's been public concern. Some of this generated by Flybe lobbying,
yes,
if you remember,
yes.
to operate scheduled flights. And there's been huge public concern, which you're articulating today. For a refurb and improvement, there'd be no need for public consultation. But my letter is quite clear to the Secretary of State in relation to our expectations. At the moment, because there's no intention to change the use or to increase the flights, I'm not sure if public consultation is required, but clearly, if there was any attempts to increase the flights or for it to be a commercial airport, there'd need to be proper consultation. And you've heard from my answer, I'd be against any increased activity of this airport. At the moment, the airport accommodates 12,000 business aircraft movements per year. You'll be aware if there's any attempts by the MOD to increase that, there should be full public consultation. But I'm happy to make further representations once I receive a response to my letter, which hopefully will reassure all of us there are no plans from the MOD to increase use.
Great. Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. It's reassuring.
Okay, thank you. Next question, we go to Assembly Member Dismore, Europol.
Thank you, Chair. I've been very clear that alongside the majority of Londoners, I believe that Britain would be better off and safer remaining in the EU. Despite this, I accept that the public have voted to leave and we now have to make the best of this decision. This makes me determined to ensure that no compromises will be made over public safety throughout the Brexit process, and I'm clear that no deal on complex security issues is simply not an option. This is why I set out 6 red lines to the government, which are crucial for continued cooperation on security and counter-terrorism with European partners. These include our continued involvement with the European Union Agency for Law Enforcement Cooperation, Europol. Europol enables vital intelligence sharing to help combat serious crimes including terrorism, money laundering and human trafficking. There are many cases where Europol and Eurojust have been instrumental in bringing people to justice. I'm therefore concerned that Michael Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator, has made clear that as far as he's concerned, the UK will no longer be a member of Europol. We need to get some clear agreement from the government on the complex issues at hand to establish how we're actually going to continue cooperation with the EU on matters of security. This is why I've written to the Home Secretary on this matter specifically. It is imperative that the government secures the same level of cooperation on security in the negotiations. Otherwise, our police will be fighting these crimes with one arm tied behind their back. The government are not providing the assurances necessary, and their failure to grip the situation could put our critical security apparatus at risk. We need urgent answers about how the government plan to ensure continuity of vital security arrangements, and we need them now.
Well, thank you for that answer. Do you agree that Europol, as indeed do all your 6 security red lines, provide a way for member states to cooperate and enable vital intelligence sharing to help combat serious crimes, like you mentioned, terrorism, money laundering, human trafficking? But Michel Barnier is right, as a matter of law, isn't he, that non-EU cannot be members of Europol because Europol is only for EU members. And when the head of MI5 was warned that the UK is facing the most severe terrorist threat ever, and the Met's National Coordinator for Counter-Terrorism Policing, AC Ball, has said, if we were to exit Europol without replacing it with at least as good a system for information and intelligence sharing and working together as currently exists, it would be a risk I would be concerned about. And given that the European Court of Justice plays a key role in overseeing data protection laws, including for Europol, that the experts giving evidence before the Commons Home Affairs Committee all agreed that accepting any possible Europol access would be predicated on guarantees that the case law of the European Court of Justice is respected by the United Kingdom, and also given that the House of Lords European Union Committee found that the National Crime Agency took the view that the types of arrangements that have thus far been made to allow third countries to cooperate with Europol from outside the EU would not be sufficient to meet the UK's needs. All these are real matters of concern, and I think it is right, and I think you would agree, that the government really does need to get a grip on this very, very quickly.
I mean, the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, when describing no deal on justice and law enforcement, used the word unthinkable. And I think she spoke from her expertise as the Home Secretary, understanding the huge cooperation that takes place between various EU countries. I think UK uses more of the services provided by Europol and the other cross-EU justice agencies than any other country. And so it's crucial that the police and the experts receive the reassurance that they need that during the transition period, and once we've left EU will have equivalents to what we have now. The alternative is criminals and terrorists having a better deal then than they have now.
I think that's important because I'm not sure if you're aware that at the Police and Crime Committee, a Conservative member tried unsuccessfully to persuade Assistant Commissioner Hewitt that a no-deal Brexit wouldn't be a problem for our security. And do you agree that the consequences of a hard Brexit or hitting the demands of hardline Brexiteers on issues like European Court of Justice, the government really would be risking the security and safety of Londoners?
Well, it's worth reminding ourselves and reminding lay people what this European cooperation means. It means vital intelligence sharing. It means the ability to extradite. It means real-time information in relation to alerts. It means being able to check the UK Borders Agency, being able to check watch lists. It means the UK being able to access criminal records throughout the EU. It means us being able to access DNA profiles, fingerprints, vehicle registrations. Now, the question to ask yourself is, if you're a criminal or a terrorist, do you want the UK having access to all these things or not? And in my view, a hard Brexit benefits criminals and terrorists.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's then move to Assembly Member Berry and a reply to her question on recognising hidden homelessness.
Can I thank you for your question? Hidden homelessness affects thousands of Londoners. My draft London housing strategy, the first ever to contain a chapter dedicated to homelessness, recognises that homelessness has many forms, including the hidden homeless. It outlines a range of policies that will help Londoners facing different forms of homelessness. For example, investment in new specialist accommodation for young people who are in education, employment or training, but at risk of homelessness. My work with boroughs so they can offer better accommodation options to households who do become homeless, and my new pan-London services for rough sleepers, such as the night transport outreach team, that will help more people off the street. Well, I'm doing all I can to help those facing or experiencing homelessness. Any short and long-term solution to homelessness, including hidden homelessness, needs the government to act too. The Assembly's Housing Committee's report recognises this fact, with many of the recommendations focusing on changes government need to make. In addition to your recommendations, I'd also emphasise three key areas that my draft housing strategy and draft London plan refer to where long-term government support is needed to help those who are hidden homeless. First, government needs to reconsider the welfare changes that we know are fueling rising levels of homelessness in London. Second, the government needs to work with us to fundamentally rethink the private rented sector. The ending of tenancies in this sector is now the single greatest cause of homelessness in London. Third, and above all, we need the government to invest more in the delivery of new homes. Many forms of homelessness are first and foremost the result of London's shortage of affordable homes. The need to tackle that shortage sits at the heart of both my draft housing strategy and my draft London plan, which set ambitious targets for the delivery of new and affordable homes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you for acknowledging the report the Housing Committee did. I think possibly the most shocking fact in it is the estimate that there's 13 times more Londoners on any one night who are hidden and homeless than you find on the streets. And that means that they're homeless, but they may not be getting any support at all from the authorities. They're not in the statistics that we record. I think our report shows very clearly there's many, many Londoners who are out there on the brink of becoming homeless, and a lot of other Londoners are being very good and looking after them and putting them up. And I think we should need to acknowledge the fact that many people are looking after their friends and their family just by who are actually homeless, and really they should be getting help from the councils, from the government, as you say. There wasn't much mention of specific hidden homelessness measures in your housing strategy, and there's a couple of things that are actually recommendations to you within the recommendations from the committee, so I wanted to ask you about those. One thing we also found is that only 1 in 5 young people who are facing homelessness even approach the local authority for help, and local authorities are going to have to give them more help soon. And so recommendations 3 and 6 in the report both ask you to do more to get better information and advice to people in this position. Recommendation 6 asks you to promote existing homelessness advice and support and put guidance for those who may be at risk of homelessness on the London website. So can I ask you if you will do that?
So, recommendation 6, both the local authority and voluntary sector services, as you know, are under considerable pressure at the moment. Most have seen sharp reductions in their funding, and local authority services are preparing for major changes in their legal duties. So we've got to be a bit cautious about promoting advice services when they're already overwhelmed and won't be able to help. Position is different in relation to rough sleeping because I commissioned Pan London Services to help this group off the street. So I will be publicising the help available to rough sleepers over the Christmas period using both the london.gov.uk website and advertising space on the public transport network.
Excellent. That is most of my next question, actually. You mentioned in your introduction to your answer, the Transport for London teams that you've got out now, trying to find people who are using night buses and tubes as places to sleep and may not be picked up as rough sleepers. We asked you to use Transport for London advertising space to inform people who might be hidden homeless where they can access relevant services. Something like Centrepoint's helpline, which is specifically aimed at young people. Would you be prepared to do that then? Give over some of the space that's advertising the hopper, maybe?
I'm making an announcement on this tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much. Finally, you mentioned the government needing to do more. We've got a lot of councils out there struggling in advance of the Homelessness Reduction Act to find the funding that they think they will need to deal with this next April. The Act gives them more duties towards people at risk, and the government's given them new, what they call additional burdens funding to help them temporarily. But I personally don't think this is anything like enough. I've been looking at the reports from Camden Council, where I'm a councillor. They've recently estimated additional costs of up to £2 million a year, while the government's funding for them is £878,000 spread over 3 years. London Councils is doing work on this, but it would help a lot, I think, if the Mayor was to take strong action to lobby the government to help councils more. Will you do this? Will you use your voice to call for this funding?
Absolutely, and thank you for raising this. I mean, and the bad news is that the Chancellor in his budget announced pilots for other parts, 3 parts of the country, not including London. You'll be aware from your personal experience, there's a huge crisis in London as well. Of course, I'll use my role to work with London councils to lobby the government. It's devastating that this Christmas again, there'll be people sleeping rough who otherwise shouldn't be, and so you can rest assured I'll be doing that.
Okay, thank you very much.
7 minutes. Assembly Member Whittle.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, just carrying on from Assembly Member Berry's point there about homelessness, one thing that's, and I'd very much like to know your view on this, one thing that's come clear to me from being on the Police and Crime Committee is that rough sleeping, which is a big part of homelessness, is actually comes under the definition of antisocial behaviour, would you believe? And it seems to me that this is not an antisocial problem, it is a social problem. Do you think that there is an anomaly there, that it actually comes under the same list as, I don't know, public nuisance and drug dealing or whatever it is in public, that actually homeless people are brought into that category? I'd
be very surprised if the police are taking action against rough sleepers for committing criminal offences, as you suggest.
No, it's under the, when we've studied antisocial behaviour, rough sleeping comes under that. I think it's an anomaly that comes from the Vagrancy Act from years ago.
Pardon. Okay.
Right? But it seems to me that it is a completely wrong categorisation of something which is a social problem, not an antisocial one.
I think absolutely right, particularly this time of year, without being sort of, without talking too much about the importance of Christmas and what it's all about. But particularly this time of year, we should remember this is a social problem. It's decades of failure by people in our profession, politicians. It can be turned around. We've shown in the past that we can end rough sleeping and homelessness. And working together, central government, the Mayor, the Assembly, local authorities, with the charities and NGOs, I think we can end rough sleeping in London. I'm determined that we should do that.
Okay. Then let's move now to Assembly Member Prince, Islamic burial sites.
Thank you, Chair. Planning for new burial provision across all faiths is the responsibility of the boroughs as local planning authorities. I do not have any powers to allocate new sites. I do recognise that in some areas of the city there is a problem with lack of burial space, and this is troubling to many communities, particularly those for whom burial is the only option. But it is for boroughs to address the problem and find appropriate sites, working together if necessary. What I can do through my new draft London plan is encourage boroughs to make appropriate provision. The previous London plan encouraged new cemetery provision, and as set out in national legislation, the reuse of graves to extend the capacity of existing cemeteries where this is culturally appropriate. My new draft London plan goes further by encouraging boroughs to work together to identify appropriate provision. This should be as close to communities as possible, but I recognise that in some instances boroughs may need to take a sub-regional approach. As well as boroughs continue to make traditional burial provision, my draft London plan also encourages innovative approaches to the provision of community burial space, particularly in inner and central London. These could include creating public gardens for the burial of ashes. Finally, I know there was a recent issue with the Garden of Peace Islamic Cemetery in Redbridge, which is estimated to only have between 3 and 5 years capacity left. The Garden of Peace brought a site in Havering to use for future burials, but their planning application was refused by Havering Council. The good news is that this site has now been approved by an inspector on appeal from the decision to refuse by Havering, and their immediate short-term pressure to find a site has now been eased.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you quite rightly said, in relation to the Muslim religion, reuse is not an option. But I hope, and I can tell that you do agree that the lack of burial sites is a major issue across London. And of course, you're absolutely right that ultimately it's the boroughs that have to make those decisions as to where they can be located. But there is a role for you, Mr. Mayor, as the Mayor of all London, I believe, in helping and encouraging boroughs to accommodate Muslim burial sites. So with that in mind, Mr. Mayor, I would really be grateful if you would agree to meet with myself, Councillor Chowdhury from Redbridge, some imams and also representatives of the Muslim burial associations in order that we could have a chat and see where you could help and assist.
Chair, I can't think of anything more fun than seeing Keith Prince outside of Mayor's Christian Time, so I'm more than happy to say yes to that meeting, if that helps.
I mutually have the excitement of meeting with you, Mr. And so I can just put on record, Mr. Mayor, my deep gratitude to you from all the people who you met the other day in relation to the tube noise. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
I think the Keith and Sadiq loving has got to be
It's
encouraged.
Christmas. It's Christmas.
See, Christmas. To do with the Christmas spirit. Yeah, thank you. Next question is from Assembly Member Boff, London Plan.
Thank you for your question. Yes, my new draft London plan serves as a blueprint for the future development and sustainable inclusive growth of our city. I'm planning for growth on the basis of its potential to improve the health and quality of life of all Londoners, to reduce inequalities and to make the city a better place to live, work and visit. I'm determined to deliver the homes that Londoners need, whilst also maintaining and enhancing the workspace that is crucial for London's economy. My draft plan uses the opportunities of a rapidly growing city to plan for a better future, using each planning decision to improve London, transforming the city over time. It plans not just for growth, but for good growth, sustainable growth that works for everyone. Planning for good growth means growing a city with more genuinely affordable, high-quality homes for Londoners to buy and rent, and a city where good quality design is embedded in all new development from the outset. It means growing a more socially integrated city with public spaces that are welcoming and accessible to all Londoners. It means growing a city with a vibrant cultural and heritage offer that engages communities and drives our creative and tourism industries. I've made it very clear that tackling London's housing crisis is one of my top priorities, and delivering the homes Londoners need is central to my draft London plan. The aim is to deliver high-quality, sustainable homes and mixed-use developments at densities that respond to local context and infrastructure capacity, rather than simply following a density matrix that offered no protection from poorly designed, unsustainable housing. The draft London plan will ensure, with a requirement for minimum internal and external space standards and scrutiny of the design and management of new development, supported by my Good Growth by Design programme, my new draft London plan embeds good architectural and design quality principles in new buildings and neighbourhoods and will deliver a sustainable, inclusive, healthier city for Londoners.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How will your removal of any target for larger homes help the 250,000 families living in overcrowded conditions in London?
I'm not sure I understand your question in relation to target for larger homes. Do you mean the minimum standards?
I mean the family-sized homes. In the previous housing strategy, there was a target for 36% of affordable homes to be family homes. That is 4 bedrooms, 3 4-bedrooms. That target has now been removed, but overcrowding, those people living in overcrowded conditions are looking for you to provide a resolution to their problem.
Well, I believe in devolution, so my draft plan encourages London boroughs to provide guidance on the size of the homes built in their local areas based on available evidence of need in their boroughs. If the Assembly members suggested a diktat from City Hall, I'm happy to receive representations. I'm a believer in local boroughs deciding on the size of homes in their borough.
Mr. Mayor, you already effectively supply those diktats, as you call them, in specifying how many homes should be built by each borough. And of course, it's your responsibility to allocate funding from the housing strategy. And what you decide should be funded will get built. And if you have no target for family homes, those family homes will not get built.
With respect, Chair, I think the question displays a misunderstanding of the way the process works. Let me try and explain. The new strategic housing market assessment forms a critical part of the evidence base, and that's what we used in the new draft London plan. Local authorities then decide the size of homes in their boroughs. What I've set out is the targets we need based upon the expert advice to meet the needs of Londoners. Roughly speaking, 65,000 homes a year. And you'll be aware, because I'm sure you know about the SHMA, they talk about the need for 1 and 2 bedroom homes across London. But you'll be aware, of course, if a local authority has a need for family homes, 3 4-bedroom homes, then of course it's open to them to, when it comes to considered applications, make sure those homes get built.
In the SHMA, Mr. Mayor, it establishes that a certain percentage should be family homes. You do not have that in either your housing strategy or your London plan. How will you ensure that the larger homes are built in order to resolve the problem of overcrowding in London? And may I remind you that overcrowding is more severe in London than any other city in the UK.
This is the sort of misunderstanding that leads to policies like the bedroom tax. The idea that you will get overcrowding resolved by freeing up the space from larger homes by a bedroom tax doesn't work. So what I'm saying is, what's the evidence of the need in London? The evidence is 65,000 homes a year. Local authorities, where they need family homes, can give permission for family homes. What the expert advice from the SHMA is we need more 1 and 2 bedroom homes. Average age of a Londoner, 34. And so, of course, it's important to build all sorts of new homes, different shapes and sizes, depending on the needs of each borough.
Mr. Mayor, according to Shelter, children in overcrowded housing are 10 times more likely to contract meningitis than children in general. That there's a direct link between childhood tuberculosis and overcrowding. Children living in overcrowded and unfit conditions are more likely to experience respiratory problems, such as coughing and asthmatic wheezing. Overcrowded conditions have been linked to slow growth in childhood, which is associated with an increased risk of coronary heart disease in later life. Homeless children are 3 to 4 times more likely to have mental health problems than other children. Mental health issues such as anxiety and depression have also been linked to overcrowding in unfit housing. And now overcrowding is linked to a delayed cognitive development and homelessness, delayed cognitive development and leads to a lack of development in communication skills. There are 250,000 families, hundreds of thousands of children being brought up in overcrowded conditions. What are you, Mr. Mayor, going to do about that?
Well, can I say, Chair, I mean, this crocodile tears from the Assembly member when his Chancellor has failed to increase from £0.5 billion a year to £2.7 billion a year,
Mr.
which is
Mayor,
what we need to build the affordable homes.
Of the Chancellor.
Chair.
I did not ask a question of the Chancellor, Mr. Mayor. I asked what you are going to do about it. Could you tell me what you are going to do about the crisis of overcrowding in this city, which this Assembly unanimously considers to be one of the worst problems facing facing people in the
Chair,
city.
although I was raised in an overcrowded house, we had manners and didn't interrupt when somebody was speaking. What I'd say is this, Chair. The government needs to invest far more in building genuinely affordable homes to ease the problem of overcrowding in London. The government has reduced the amount of money we get over successive years, and the government could very easily help us solve this problem. They could increase the amount of money we invest in affordable homes. That would ease overcrowding. They could give councils the ability to borrow to build. That would ease overcrowding. They could give them the ability to prudential borrow. That would ease overcrowding. When it comes to refurbishments, rather than having refurbishments without consulting residents, they could make sure council consulted residents by changing
Mr.
the
Mayor, I
law.
want to know what you're going to do. You've abandoned any target for family homes. The only solution in your London plan is to encourage 1- and 2-bedroom flats. How do forcing families of 4 and 5 and 6 people into a 2-bedroom flat resolve overcrowding problems? If you're not going to build bigger houses, Mr. Mayor, we are going to continue with the problem. It is as simple as that. So all I'm asking is, what are you going to do?
Chair, I've already asked this question. One of the problems when you write down your questions is you don't listen to the answers you're given. So the answer I gave 4 questions ago was that local authorities can give permission to build bigger homes.
So you're going to do nothing. You're
no,
waiting for local authorities to do it. I'm trying to get an answer. I'm trying to get an answer, Chair. And he tells me what other people are going to do, but never what you're going to do.
No, in the same way you put narrative around your question, where
Don't come all passive-aggressive with me, Mr. Mayor. I'm trying to get you to answer a question and you're not doing it.
Assembly Member Boff, can you just...
It's enough. It's futile. Talking about the problems of overcrowding with this, Mayor. Futile.
Okay, well, I'll take your advice, and Mr. Mayor, we'll move on.
Okay.
I'm happy to move on to... No, I've got other people... Excuse me, I've got other people who want to ask on this. I've got Assembly Member Gavron.
Mayor, Mr. Mayor, I would like to ask you, but before I do, about the London plan, before I do, I want to just say I really welcome the fact that this plan is more people-centred. I want to follow up from what Andrew Boff was saying about another aspect of families living. It's families with children and young people living at high densities. That's what my question's about. I notice that the London plan is very strong on play policies, and they're really good, innovative policies on outdoor play and independent mobility for children, which is important in a city like London. But in order for this to work in high-rise estates, high-density estates, housing association, council estates, it's important that children have easy access to the outside play areas, and that also that their parents can actually overlook and see in an informal way, because the play provision will be, as it says in the guidance, close by. Now, all over the world, from Auckland to Vancouver, planning departments have policies which say that families with children, young people in them, should not live above the 5th floor. And that's for the reasons that I've just outlined. Would you be prepared, therefore, to consider a presumption against families with children and young people in them living above, say, the 5th floor?
So what we're saying is, as you'll appreciate, the Mayor can't decide the allocation of homes. That's a job for the council or housing associations. The allocation of which family gets which home is not decided by the Mayor.
It's not which family, it's larger units. This is a planning policy. Larger units at lower levels of developments. That is planning.
Well, I'm really happy during the draft London plan stage for you to make those representations, and others may as well. But we have built in play space in the draft London plan, because you're right, the importance of families and with children having sufficient play space. So, for example, we've made sure there's provision of safe, accessible, well-designed play and leisure spaces is part and parcel of delivering good growth. Important part of children having access to places to play. Healthy streets approach encourages local authorities, when it comes to planning, to make sure children have places to play. And the draft plan also includes a requirement for a 10 square metres of play space per child in residential developments. You make a different point, though, in relation to the units of homes on floors 0 to 5 being bigger units for families, as you suggest. I'm really happy during the draft London Plan stage, during the consultation phase, for you and others to make submissions in that regard, and I'm sure when it comes to the inspectorate stage, those will be taken on board.
That's very welcome, because I think good growth really has to mean that it's good for children and young people. And there is evidence of the harm done to children and young people if they are located, their accommodation is high up in tower blocks. We have the evidence of that. I mean, restricted play opportunities, social isolation have led to behavioural change and have led to sometimes mental ill health.
Well,
so it would be really, really good if we can actually have a very strong steer on this, both for the local plans at borough level and for your own strategic planning applications. And it needs really to be in the housing, not just the housing strategy, in the London plan as well.
That's why I'm very interested, Chair, with the point you make. It's a really interesting point, which is why I'd encourage you to make sure that you respond to the draft London plans, but with evidence, obviously, because there are other studies that actually say residents on higher floors of high-density developments can have a positive impact on health and social outcomes, as well as high levels of satisfaction. So I'd encourage you to please respond to the draft London plan consultation phase to try and bring about the changes you're referring to, because I'm fascinated by what you say.
Okay, I'd have to look at that, because it's about giving access to outdoor play with other children. But I'll come back to you on it.
Yeah.
Assembly Member O'Connell.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Indeed, you talked about local context earlier with your answer to Andrew Boff, and I refer you to some announcements around green spaces and protected green spaces. Can you explain, therefore, why in your new local plan you are encouraging garden grabbing?
Can I just clarify this, because there's been a misunderstanding by some people. So the government, your government, announced a relaxation of permitted development rights, which means that an owner of a house can build up to 50% of their plot, including their back garden, which you suddenly are an advocate for, without any planning controls. So your friends in government have said anybody can build on their back garden up to 50% without the need to go to a local authority, apply for planning permission. And by the way, this doesn't lead to more homes being built, it's simply more building on people's back garden. What I'm saying is you should apply for permission in relation to building on backland developments. And if it's the case that there is a line taken up, there should be no net loss of overall green cover, and the development should result in additional homes that Londoners can benefit from. But it's got to go through a planning process for councillors to decide, rather than a permitted development with homeowners deciding.
You'll be aware that permitted development does not apply to new dwellings and has strict limits. However, why is it though...
With respect, if the mischief you're seeking to prevent is to prevent green things being built on, you're allowing up to 50% of green things being built on without permission. So you can't have it both ways.
Mr Mayor, you seem to be setting a tone of adversarial comments. I've spent, like many councillors and GLA members in this room, sticking up for residents who have had inappropriate developments threatened in back gardens nearby, which is ruining the biodiversity, environmental aspects. The previous mayors and indeed boroughs, including the Labour borough that I am in, placed presumptions against back garden development in their areas. Why, Mr Mayor, would you remove that presumption?
There's a presumption in favour of housing on small sites for the simple reason we need to build more homes to meet the needs of our city.
No one can disagree with the fact that, as Andrew Boff has wisely pointed out, the housing crisis is the biggest issue facing London. And I welcome very much your announcements around public land owned by TfL, developing in town centres, high-rise buildings in appropriate spaces. Those are commendable. We need to push those forward. But speaking as an outer London representative, and you often speak about being a South London, outer London chap yourself, is it not important to preserve the characteristics of those areas?
And there's got to be good design. We've got to make sure that any space that's taken up is recovered, green cover that I've talked about. Local councillors get a say. but I'm not going to resolve from meeting head on the challenge we face, which is making sure we build the good quality homes Londoners need.
Okay, so you're happy to build over the back gardens in outer London. Okay, I'll take that one. My next question
I think that was a press release rather than a question, but hey-ho.
Okay, hey-ho, there you go. My next question is also relating to your presumption on any properties within PTAL ratings of 5 and 6, is that those developments would have 0 cars. Again, do you think that works in areas of outer London where they're poorly served by public transport?
Well, the draft plan focuses on much of the future housing growth in areas where they're either within 800 metres of a station or a town centre, or which benefit from good public transport. You mentioned PTAL. Levels 3 to 6 is a good example of where homes can be built. And that allows boroughs to, as you are keen to do, preserve the existing density of areas beyond these spatial areas. But look, we've got a situation where our population is going from 8.8 million to 9 million in 2020, 10 million in 2030. We've got to reduce those people who use cars, especially the most polluting types driving around our city. And if that means good public transport, good homes near public transport hubs, hopefully less need for cars.
Mr. Mayor, surely you display a lack of, perhaps an unusual lack of understanding for those outer London boroughs. And we all represent outer London boroughs around this horseshoe. It may well be a sensible policy within central London, where you've got served well by underground services and you have a PTAL rating of 5 or 6. But if you're an outer London borough with one bus or perhaps no buses, surely you are putting together a policy that is completely impractical for many outer London boroughs.
Well, I hope not. That's not the intention. And outer London boroughs have an opportunity to respond to the draft London plan. I look forward to their responses to the draft London plan, as is the normal course.
Okay, you don't seem too certain, Mr. Mayor. But anyway, thank you. I'll take that.
That's also not a question, but also another press release.
Okay. No, I think it was phrased as a question.
Oh, was it? So what was the question? I'll answer it then. What was the question?
You appeared not to be certain. My question to you is, A, I think this policy of nil parking in 5 to 6 as an absolute iron rule will be detrimental to areas of outer London that are badly served by public transport. Would you like to agree with that or disagree?
I disagree that my policies are anti-outer London. I'm a mayor for all Londoners, and I welcomed all the votes given to me by your constituents to me when I ran to be the mayor. One of the reasons why they gave me their support was because I promised to address the housing crisis. This draft London plan helps to address the housing crisis, and I'm sure those in your part of London who are on council housing waiting lists, who are living in overcrowded accommodation, who can't afford to rent, let alone buy, will welcome this route map to building the homes that Londoners need, including in Croydon and Sutton.
We're just talking about this debate is around parking spaces. All I would urge, Mr. Mayor, if you're going to impose this measure, you must have a step change in public transport in outer London.
That's a comment.
Please, and that is a comment.
That's a comment.
Not unhelpful comment.
No, that's a comment. So we'll go on to a question from Assembly Member Hall.
Okay. Mayor, now that you've accepted in your new London plan that fire safety can be a planning issue, will you now agree to review the fire safety of the tower blocks that you have previously approved on a call-in, especially the 17-storey Palmerston Road tower blocks in Harrow, where LFIPA were not even consulted on the proposals and where there is no commitment to a sprinkler system?
So all the planning rules that currently exist before the draft London plan were followed in permissions given. If it's a building control issue, that's a matter for the local council.
So no. But when I asked you about this in June, on the June Mayor's question time, you refused to review these applications because you insisted that new blocks are different from old blocks. However, your new London plan now includes fire safety requirements for new blocks. So sure. Can you guarantee to me that the tower blocks you have approved would meet with these requirements?
Sure. Chair, let me try and answer this in a way that addresses the point the Assembly member makes. The draft London plan, which we published a couple of weeks ago, is now out for consultation. And that will hopefully, after consultation, become the London plan. The Assembly member is asking me to retrospectively use the provisions of the draft London plan on an application given permission a few months ago. That's the question, as I understand it.
Yes.
The answer is I can't do that. I'm not allowed by law.
Well, you poo-hooed it at the time anyway, but given that you have called for sprinklers to be installed in every tower block, why have you not required this in your new fire safety policy?
So, the new draft London plan.
Why have you not required sprinklers in your new fire safety policy?
So the new draft London plan has a number of things which are pioneering. Nobody else has them, including the need for fire evacuation lifts, including the need for a third-party statement, including the consideration of other ways of suppressing fires. One way is sprinklers, one way is water mist, for example, in elderly homes, and those are things that no other plan has, let alone London plan. That's in the draft London plan, which we're consulting on. If the question is, can I retrospectively apply these to those schemes given permission, or those buildings already built, the answer is I'm not allowed to. But if it's the case that she feels strongly about this, she'll give evidence to the review the government's undertaking, and also lobby her government to financially help those councils to retrofit sprinklers into these tower blocks so these tower blocks can be safe.
Well, at the actual time I asked you, Mayor, and you poo-hooed it. On to a slightly different aspect. Are you concerned that your London plan policies could see the proliferation of beds in sheds?
No.
You don't think it will?
No.
Do you think beds in sheds are a problem?
Well, one of the reasons why we have beds in sheds, Chair, is because of the housing crisis caused by successive governments. But anybody who knows anything will know 8 of the last 10 years Tory mayor, 7 of the last 10 years Tory government, and so you'd hope there'd be some humility in relation to the crisis of beds in sheds. It's a big problem. Government. I've been out on a raid with Newham Council who are taking action against landlords who are taking advantage of these tenants. Literally are beds in sheds, I'm afraid. One of the things I was hoping the government would do is give them more powers over licensing of private premises. Unfortunately, her government failed to do so, but I'll work with local authorities to take action against rogue landlords who have beds and sheds.
Mr Mayor, do you think it's appropriate that at every given opportunity, the only thing you do is manage to criticise somebody other than giving a constructive answer to anything? Do you think that's appropriate?
I don't accept the premise of your question. And I blame you for that.
And it's all Boris's fault, you know.
Oh, of course. Boris and the government.
Assembly Member Hall, are you willing to go
That was
back?
also a press release, I suspect, Chair.
Finish, yeah. Okay, let's move on to Assembly Member Bailey. Assembly Member Bailey, we're on issues to do with London Plan.
And I'm going to speak to the Mayor on issues to do with London Plan.
Thank you.
Hopefully we're going to have a love-in as well. Let's have a little try, Sadiq. Let's see what we can do.
That would be nice.
Let's see if we can change the trend. So in your London Plan, you give quite a clear indication that you'd like to support councils who are using JVs to deliver on housing, because obviously housing's our big issue in London. Lots of councils across of all different colours are using JVs to get things done. Is this still the case? Are you still willing to support councils who are looking to use joint ventures to deliver housing in London?
Most councils have got no other ways of getting the revenues in to build the homes they need because of the huge cuts made by central government. And so unless the government was to allow them to lift the cap on borrowing or to allow them to borrow prudentially, it's very difficult for a council to regenerate the housing in their boroughs. Joint ventures is one way of doing that.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. So could I ask you to support the joint venture in Haringey? There's lots of people in Haringey now who are worried that the council are under pressure, quite serious political pressure, not to deliver on a joint venture they have planned, which will deliver over 5,000 new homes and a brand new town centre in a part of London that really needs these developments. Could you give us an assurance now that you will support that council in achieving that goal?
It could all come to me for planning considerations, so it's probably quasi-judicial, so I've got to be very careful what I say about schemes at this stage. But I'll be watching Haringey joint ventures, like other joint ventures. It's not wise for me to comment on these because it may come to me for planning.
Let me rephrase that. Will you support the council leader then in her pursuit of this goal? Let me put it that way, because that is not quasi-judicial, is it? You can say yes or no about supporting this person. The reason I ask, Mayor, because councils all across London will take a clear steer from this, that in times of trouble, when they're trying to deliver your housing target, our London housing target, they can rely on you to be above the politics and deliver. Will you support it?
No, Assemblymember Bailey, no, we've had the answer.
No,
The
mayor doesn't even look particularly upset about what I'm saying.
Excuse me, I'm making a ruling. Your question relates to a borough leader's intention about a particular matter that will be referred to the mayor. He is not in a position today to talk about support to that particular leader. Can you rephrase or come back with a different way of getting to the bottom of your question?
Hold on. Chair, I think you've
That's my ruling.
I accept your ruling, Chair. Thank you for your ruling. I'd just like to say the mayor didn't look particularly upset and he now looks pleased that he feels you rescued him.
Chair, can I, if it helps, Chair?
No, that's enough. No. Listen, we just...
Chair, let me put you out your misery.
I'm not in misery.
Oh, I certainly am.
No, I'm not in misery. I'm not in misery. Chairs don't get in misery. They just make rulings. Now, do you have another question?
Will you be supporting JVs across London?
It's a sweeping question. I mean, horses for courses, Chair. But what I will say, and it's really important in the context of Haringey and all across London, vote Labour.
Thank you.
Which Labour? Which Labour, Mayor?
Okay.
Which Labour?
Assemblymember Bailey.
Sorry, I'm just conversing with my Mayor. He doesn't seem particularly upset about talking to me. But Chair, I'm going to leave it there because I don't want you to bully me afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. As if I would. Okay. We now go on to a question from Assembly Member Hall on the night czar. We're talking about the role here rather than the individual. And I say this because it's my understanding, according to our rules, the individual holding this position is not a head of unit level or above. And it is not our practice to talk about individuals in public. So I'll take a question on the post, as we've seen here. So, Mr. Mayor, can I have an answer in relation to the post?
Thank you, Chair. The nighttime economy is vitally important for London. It's worth £26.3 billion to our economy, employs 1 in 8 Londoners, and is a key driver of town centre regeneration. Our nighttime cultural offer is world-renowned, from our theatres to our music venues and pubs. However, since 2008, London has lost a quarter of its pubs, half of its nightclubs, over half of its LGBT+ venues, and over a third of its live music venues. I'm determined to halt this decline. If London is to retain its reputation for world-class nightlife, no single organisation or public body can solve these problems alone. We all need to work together to ensure the capital thrives as a 24-hour city in a way that is safe and enjoyable for everyone. This is why I appointed Amy Levey as my night czar. Other cities like Berlin, Paris and Amsterdam have similar roles, and they bring together key stakeholders across the city to grow the nighttime economy in a way that balances the needs of businesses, those who want a good night out, or those who want a good sleep. Over the past year, my night czar has made excellent progress. When she was appointed, music venues were closing at an alarming rate. One of the world's most famous nightclubs, Fabric, had closed. My night czar has worked with boroughs, the police, and hundreds of businesses from the nighttime economy to start to turn this around. In the interest of brevity, I can only touch on some of the many activities since her appointment. I hope it'll give you a flavour of some of the things that she's been doing. My night czar has published a vision of 24-hour London, setting out my vision for London to become a truly 24-hour city. Worked closely with the Met Police to remove the controversial Form 696 for music venues and music promoters, which urban and grime musicians and DJs felt was unfairly targeting them. Published guidance for boroughs to grow and diversify the nighttime economies, and has worked with my Deputy Mayor Jules Pipe on the draft London plan to include for the first time ever new policies to support the nighttime economy and protect pubs, as well as the agent of change policy so that pubs, clubs and venues can coexist along with new residential development. Developed a charter for LGBT+ venues, which has already been used in a landmark case to ensure the Joiners Arm in Hoxton remains an LGBT+ venue. Supported over 120 businesses, bringing together residents, community groups, developers, police, local authorities and others to reach positive outcomes. These include venues like the George Tavern in Stepney Green, the Rio Cinema in Dalston and the Electric Ballroom in Camden. hosted 7 night surgeries to speak with residents, nighttime workers and business owners, working closely with borough councils and MPs, taking a leadership role on supporting a safer London for women, hosting the first Women's Night Safety Summit, and she's developing a Women's Safety Charter to make the capital's venues safer for women at night.
Right. First of all, that's interesting, Mr Mayor, because that's different to the information that's come back from our freedom of information request, but I've taken down what you said. Do you think that your night czar would be advised to meet all London boroughs as part of her job? So far, she's only met 18 of the 32 boroughs.
Time permitting, of course, if it's possible, yeah.
Well, it's been a year. Okay, you think that's acceptable to you, is it?
Oh, well, I'm happy to set up all the other...
Very interesting.
I'm happy to set up all the meetings she's had, if that helps, Chair. It's a long list.
No, you don't need to do that. I mean, I would have thought that your night czar would have wanted to have met all of the boroughs as opposed to just 18 of them. So perhaps that's a suggestion, bearing in mind her hours have been doubled and she's had a massive pay increase. So perhaps we could suggest, or perhaps would you suggest to your night czar that she actually meets all the boroughs, Mr Mayor?
She's going about meeting as many leaders of communities as she possibly can.
Well, I'm sure everybody around this table would like to see her meeting everybody. Since she is actually receiving taxpayers' money for the job, what performance indicators are in place to make sure that she is actually delivering?
So,
you can't blame the government.
No, this is one you can't blame the government for. Or indeed Boris.
No.
So the performance criteria, Chair, we're talking about an employee, by the way, I remind you, Chair, is to devise and publish a vision for London as a 24-hour global city, to produce and publish a roadmap to implement the vision, to publish best practice guidance for the night economy, to give public speeches and carry out mayoral engagements to support and be an advocate for the night economy and articulate the 24-hour London vision, to deliver a nighttime economy supplementary planning guidance, to begin enacting the Agent for Change, and the objective criteria, Chair, about one of our employees, as part of her appraisal. The objectives include devise and publish a vision of London as a 24-hour global city, produce and publish a roadmap to implement the vision, publish best practice guidance for a nighttime economy, give public speeches and carry out engagements on my behalf, and to deliver an SPG enacting the Agent of Change principle.
In the original spec, the job was to include chairing the Nighttime Commission, and yet when your particular night czar of the moment arrived, you then had to take on a QC to do that, because your choice of the night czar, not mentioning any names, Chair, couldn't do that. Do you think that's acceptable? Because now you've doubled your night czar's hours and you've had to employ a QC to do the job that was in the original spec. Do you think that's acceptable?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
Taxpayers' money. Okay. Are you aware that 139 pubs have closed this year already?
Well, I'm really happy to talk about the pubs closed since 2008. We're starting to halt that decline. A lot of people have given credit for that halt and decline, not just to the current mayor, but to the current night czar as well. I'm happy to say, Chair, when the decline began, but I'll be accused of politicising the hopeless previous mayor, who's a friend of these guys.
He's a very good mayor, actually.
It's, I just said, are you aware 139 have closed since your night czar's appointment? Well, I tell you what, Mr Mayor, would you like to just take it as fact? They have. Can you tell me why you've doubled the time of the night czar and not only doubled the wages but increased also?
It's quite clear from the work that the...
No, we're going then into, as I said before, we discuss in public the employment hours and salary of heads of unit level and above. If you want to persist with your question on the employment hours and pay of the night czar, then I will have to ask for the press and public to be cleared from the gallery. It's up to you.
Okay, no, that's fine. As somebody that is a contracted out employer, would you expect a night czar or whoever else to seek permission from the GLA before accepting a second job?
That's about the employment and terms that will be dealt with
Okay.
under the GLA employment procedures. Try again, Assembly Member Hall.
I'm sorry, Chair. I just am mindful that we all like transparency, and it is taxpayers' money after all.
Hear, hear.
A lot of complaints have been made about what this particular job spec involves and how we should actually hold the owner of this particular job to account, which is clearly what we're trying to do. But if that's unpalatable to you, Chair, I'm one that thoroughly believes in transparency, but I will leave it at that.
Do you have any more questions, Assembly Member Hall?
No, because I think you'll stop me, Chair.
Thank you. Let's then move to the next subject. Assembly Member Desai, police budget.
Thank you for your question. It is truly astonishing that in a year where this country has faced repeated terror attacks and when crime is rising, the Chancellor provided no additional funding for police in his budget. The fact it wasn't even mentioned speaks volumes about this government's attitude to policing. Since 2010, London has lost 76 police stations and front counters and thousands of PCSOs and police staff as the Met sought to protect frontline officers from the brunt of the cuts. In all, more than £600 million savings were taken from the Met during that time. I'm doing everything I can to protect the Met's budget, and I've had to take tough decisions on further reducing the number of police stations and on increasing the police share of council tax. However, with around £400 million in further savings needed by 2021 in order to balance the books, and with the options for finding significant savings elsewhere in the Met becoming even fewer, we're now sadly in the position when we must reduce the number of police officers in London. The wage bill is the Met's biggest single area of spending, and to achieve the levels of savings required, we can no longer avoid reducing it. The budget for the coming year provides for, on average, 30,000 officers. We will probably go below 30,000 police officers in the coming year. By 2021, that number could be around 26,900. There is no question this will impact on public safety. Put simply, the demand on policing is increasing while the supply of policing is decreasing. The Met now face very tough decisions about how they prioritise their declining resources to protect the public. The Met Police Commissioner has also warned that if officer numbers fall as far as we fear, and I quote, "we will absolutely have to look at whether we can be quite as front-footed and proactive as I would like us to be, and doing as much as I would like us to do on prevention. We probably cannot," end quote. The government has ignored those warnings, and ultimately it is the public who will pay the price.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to carry on the safety theme, and to some extent you already answered my supplementary question, but I'll still put it to you. The Commissioner was here yesterday at the meeting of the Police and Crime Committee, and she said that if police numbers were to fall to 26,900 and a series of major incidents were to happen, it would mean calling on the help of other police forces, quote, but sooner, unquote, with a, quote, greater impact on other crime investigations and other public safety issues, unquote, after the incident. What do you make of all this? And do you think that this is a sustainable position for the Met to be in?
I think we're in a really tough position. I can't remember a time we've been in a more tougher position. And by the way, we have more than 200 police officers involved in the Grenfell Tower fire investigation. Nationally, crime is going up. And as I said to you, at a time when crime is going up, police numbers are going down. We contribute, roughly speaking, 20% towards police funding via council tax. Central government contributes a significant amount, and they're cutting that. Few police officers leads to people feeling less safe, and also them being less safe, because inevitably it means they can do less of the prevention stuff that helps us be safer.
I think it was last week that Amber Rudd told us that future funding must be, quote, based on evidence and not assertion. What evidence have you seen from her and from the Home Office that £370 billion of cuts that the Met has got to make over the next 4 years is a good idea, and that it won't impinge upon your and the Met's duty to keep London safe?
So I find the comments from Amber Rudd peculiar. Some find them offensive, because chief constables, senior police officers, don't make a habit of speaking publicly about their concerns in relation to policing. They are not the boy crying wolf. They are concerned for a reason. The just talking about counter-terrorism, the workload of the counter-terror police has increased by more than 30% at a time when they've had a 7% cut in their funding. Nationally, so these guys can't blame the Mayor of London, nationally, the ONS shows recorded crime has increased by 14% in the year to June 17 evidence. Violence against a person nationally is up by 19%. Robbery nationally by more than 25%. Burglary nationally 20%. Knife crime nationally 26%. There's the evidence there that crime is going up, which anybody who follows evidence would assume we need more policing. The government is not providing the additional resources we need, and I worry about the safety not just of my city, Londoners, but across the country too.
I couldn't agree more, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Assembly Member O'Connell.
Mr. Mayor, everyone around this chamber held the previous mayor to account on level of crime in this town, notwithstanding the financial pressures that he was under. You are nearly 2 years into your mayoralty, and crime is going up in London. Serious knife crime, serious youth violence, which we all see as a major challenge in the borough. And we all around this horseshoe accept that the Met deserves a proper financial settlement. But, Mr. Mayor, surely you must take some responsibility around the crime situation in London, because it is under your watch. How do you respond to that?
I'm quite clear in relation to my response to the concerns we have around policing. I increased last year the police precept by the maximum allowed. You'll remember, because you probably supported it the year before, frozen, remarkably frozen. So we're providing the resources the police need. Roughly speaking, 20% of the funding comes from council tax precept. You don't need to look into the magic ball, crystal ball, to predict I'll probably be increasing council tax police precept by the maximum allowed next year as well. Working with communities to give them confidence in the police, but you can't escape the fact that police numbers are going down or that crime is rising nationally. You'll be aware from that as somebody who studies these things as the chair of your committee. I think we've got to make sure we do all that we can. We've published a new knife crime strategy. We've published a new police and crime plan. We're working with communities to make sure they are the eyes and ears of the police. 8.8 million eyes and ears are far more effective than 30,000 eyes and ears.
The previous mayor set targets in his scrutiny of the police. People agreed or disagreed with that regime, but he set targets. Why have you not set targets against issues like violent crime, serious youth violence? Is that not a weakness in your scrutiny of the police generally?
Well, you'll be aware of the police. You'll be aware of the police and crime plan stage. You'll be aware of the dashboards, and you'll be aware of the work the police and crime plan envisages over this area over the next 4 years. Yeah.
There's no targets there, but I'll let that rest. Lastly, my point is we talked about numbers. Numbers are an emotive subject to people in this building and also particularly to Londoners. And you quite freely talked about figures of 26,900 earlier in this week. There is a gap of 183 million left to be sourced, which will be a challenge, I admit. Are you saying, therefore, that the only way the police will meet that target is by cutting police numbers?
We can't find any other ways to make the savings. So we're closing another half front cameras police stations, trying to increase efficiencies, back office costs, roughly speaking, at 17-18%, hoping to get them to 15%. The biggest chunk of the policing budget is human beings, police staff. And the only way to balance the books, unless the government decides to invest more in policing, is to reduce police numbers.
I will make a comment, and you may comment on it. The previous mayor and his deputy mayor did work with the senior Met officers to find savings of some 600 million. I know you can only sell buildings once, but there is an ability in a budget of size 3.5 billion to find 183 million. Surely that you should be asking that they look beyond reducing police numbers to find that gap.
You can only sell off the family silverware once, and your friend sold it off. I can't sell it off again.
Okay.
We're trying to see if there's any other family silverware hidden away. It doesn't appear to be, but if I find any, I'll see if we need it. If we don't need it, we may need to sell it off. But then you can't, on the other hand, complain when we decide to close a police station that brings in more revenues, as was suggested at the last MQTs for the very reason. We are having to make big savings because of the decisions made by central government. You may not like it because they're in your party, but it's your party doing it, your government doing it. We're paying the price.
I guess that's your usual response. My last comment is why therefore in your first budget you cut 38 million from the police budget on recruitment?
No, I didn't cut any money from the policing budget. Because of the projections made by the previous mayor, it wasn't possible to recruit the numbers to get to 32,000 in that year. So rather than that being in one column, moved to another column. We added money to the policing budget, not simply because of the 1.99% precept increase, which the previous mayor had at zero, but also bringing over £24 million on top of the monies in the policing budget. And the bad news is we'll have to see if we can find additional monies from elsewhere to try and fill the gaping hole caused by your government.
Okay, I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you, Assemblymember O'Connell. Let's move then to a question from, absolutely, Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, you did a bit of a review when you came in, actually, which I thought was quite sensible, in relation to TfL land. And with TfL's land, you said, instead of just selling it off, we're going to see if we can work with partners, and I think there's a framework with partners who you work with, I don't want to go into that, but whereby instead of selling off the land, you're going to do JVs, JDs, and generate revenue. Have you put that to MOPAC, Mr Mayor? Is that a possibility, rather than just having, as you say, selling off the family silver, actually polishing it and getting some better return?
Well, two things. Firstly, note, Chair, a Conservative member welcomed a review that I've undertaken.
A love-in, a love-in.
Just
first thing.
out later.
We're having a love-in today, Mr
Love-in.
You'll lose your mates, be careful. The second thing is...
I ain't got no mates.
The second thing is, the legislation is a bit different with the Met Police to TfL in relation to best value, but you're right to raise this because obviously what you're advising me against is inadvertently getting a windfall now when we could get a make better use of it. And it's a good point you make. We're exploring that, but the legislation is a bit different. We've got to maximise revenues for the reasons that Senator O'Connell alluded to, at the same time being cognizant of the fact you're making, which is obviously we kick ourselves if we sold stuff off, which we could use sensibly. So it's a conversation we're having with MOPAC, but just the difference is the TfL legislation is just different to the MOPAC legislation, so the wiggle room is less.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave you there. Yeah,
Thank you very much. Let's go to a question now from Assemblymember Shaw, a response to Grenfell Tower fire.
Chair, for reasons you'll appreciate, I'll give a slightly longer answer to this question than to others today. Today marks 6 months since the devastating fire at Grenfell Tower. I'd like to take again this opportunity to remember those 71 people who lost their lives in the tragedy, as well as many more who have been affected by this horrible event. It is absolutely essential that we learn every lesson we can from this terrible tragedy. I continue to call on the government to ensure that the Grenfell Public Inquiry report as soon as possible and the review of fire safety regulations is as full and effective as possible. I've also asked the Prime Minister to work with me to ensure social housing residents are given a proper voice in future decisions that affect them. I'm also backing the Mirrors campaign to ensure sprinklers are fitted in social housing blocks across the country. As I've said before, retrofitting sprinklers is one of the best options for reducing fire risk in tall buildings. If the review of building regulations and the independent advisory group determine that sprinklers are required to make buildings safe, then government must ensure that councils and other affected organisations are able to finance such a programme, as well as other actions to make buildings safe. My officers are collecting information on costs of installing sprinklers, recladding and other fire protection measures that would help make existing buildings safer, and this is being used to support work to make the case for further support from government. I'm utilising all the limited powers I have to improve fire safety. My draft London plan has for the first time introduced policy requirements for all new development proposals to achieve the highest standards of fire safety. This means that in London, the fire safety of new developments will be properly considered and planned from the outset, and developers will need to be explicit about how the highest standards will be achieved at planning application stage. My draft London plan also contains a requirement that major development proposals should be submitted with a fire statement and independent fire strategy proposed by a third-party suitably qualified assessor. This will provide evidence to show that the higher standards have been met. It requires all development proposals to be designed to incorporate appropriate features which reduce the risk to life in the event of a fire, be construed in an appropriate way to minimise the risk of fire spread, provide suitable access and equipment for firefighting, and to provide suitable and convenient means of escape for all building users by the provision of fire evacuation lifts, benefiting many disabled and older people in particular. These requirements apply to all development proposals in London and will ensure that via the planning system, new developments in London achieve the highest standards of fire safety, going beyond minimum standards, incorporating robust emergency evacuation procedures that Londoners can have confidence in using.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for a very full and very welcome response. I welcome your commitment to additional fire safety measures in the New London Plan. Sticking to the New London Plan, where you state that there is a fire statement requirement for major development proposals, and it also mentions installation of sprinklers at an early stage of building design, which is absolutely welcome. Will this be applicable to medium to high-rise rise residential buildings? And this is important, you may want to answer this. Do you think that there may be merit in considering the Welsh example where there is compulsory requirement for sprinklers for all residential buildings?
So, dealing with your second question first, having got the powers over existing high-rise buildings, however, all recently built tower blocks, like all new buildings, must meet modern safety standards, and these include requirements around fire detection, alarm systems, and sprinklers, ensuring the compartmentalisation of buildings and providing for escape and access for fire and rescue. And the only one thing with fire sprinklers is, I'm in favour of any suppression of fire, so it could be miss in a sheltered elderly home. In relation to your medium-rise to high-rise residential buildings, my policy requirements in the draft and the plan are for all new development proposals. What all new developments should achieve the highest form of fire safety, and it's at the outset. And this is over and above what's done elsewhere. If it's the case, I'll revisit the Welsh example. If it's the case that the Welsh have something that we could pinch, I'm all in favour of stealing things well rather than inventing them badly. And so I'll see what they're doing, Navin.
I have a couple of further questions, but if I may, Mr. Mayor, I would like to pursue this outside this question time with your team.
Chair, can I suggest that I arrange for Fiona Twycross, I can do it in the chair, to meet with the Assembly member to discuss the proposals.
And also, this is at London Plan level, and obviously how London Plan can actually help to strengthen the fire safety.
And the chair of FIFA is feeding into Jules and London Plan, so we'll make sure that happens.
Please, thank you very much.
Okay. No other questions on that? No, good. Let's go on then to a question from Assembly Member Devonish on consultation engagement with the disabled and the elderly.
Thank you for this important question. It's important to remember why we're having to make these changes. They're a direct consequence of the government's cuts to policing and the need to make savings wherever possible that don't cut into officer numbers. The Met and MOPAC take their responsibilities under the Equality Act extremely seriously, which is why the consultation published in July specifically refers to our obligations under Section 149 of the Act, namely, to have due regard to the need to eliminate discrimination and advance equality of opportunity for those with a protected characteristic, end quote. MOPAC worked with the Met to analyse the current use of front counters and other forms of public access by older people and people with disabilities, along with those with other protected characteristics, to understand the potential impact of the proposed changes on these groups. Some of this analysis fed into the draft Equality Impact Assessment, which was published alongside the consultation document for people to comment on. No draft Equality Impact Assessment or formal consultation document was published in 2013, when the previous mayor closed 76 front counters and police stations, more than double those consulted on this year. During the consultation process, submissions were received either online, by post, or through the public meetings held in every borough, which represented the views of older people and people with disabilities. But MOPAC and the Met wanted to go further than just relying on those groups coming forward. This is why MOPAC worked with other organisations, including Age UK London, the London Older People's Steering Group, and Inclusion London, which supports over 70 organisations collectively representing 700,000 disabled Londoners, hold dedicated sessions to discuss the proposals. As decisions were taken, this feedback was considered and individual consideration was given to the equality impact of the changes in each borough. This, for example, identified the needs of people with mobility problems in certain communities, which is why MOPAC and the Met are introducing enhanced community contact sessions for those communities over an hour from the nearest front counter. It also reflected, for example, how the improved Met website would support deaf Londoners, which is something MOPAC highlighted in the consultation. The Met have also been clear that in all of their interactions with the public, they will prioritise those most vulnerable Londoners, and this is reflected in the strategy. When the final strategy was published, this was accompanied by a final equality impact assessment, which highlights some of the findings of the consultation and considers the impact and mitigation of the changes to older people, those with disabilities and others. I think this compares, Chair, favourably to the previous Mayor's closure of police stations in 2013, when there was no draft equality impact assessment, no formal consultation document, and he received less than a quarter of the number of submissions received this time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do you have any figures on how many elderly and disabled people took part in the consultation, please?
I'm sure I can provide this to you offline if you want me to.
Thank you. There was no actual question on the equality impact statement in the consultation. So how did you get the public feedback on this, please?
So I don't follow what you mean.
There was no question on the equality impact statement in the consultation. How did you get public feedback on it for these two vital groups in our community?
We consulted them. So we consulted them not just via the draft EIA, hosted a meeting with the Older People's Advisory Group. We also met with them at public meetings and engaged with them. So,
are you aware that yesterday, I think most people in this room would have received an email saying, giving us 24 hours notice that the closure programme was going to happen?
I'm aware that the police stations, front counters are closing, most of them this week.
And do you think 24 hours notice for particularly these two vulnerable groups in our society is appropriate?
Well, no, the consultation began in July. So August, September, October, November, December, that's 5 months.
You are aware that the Independent Consultation Institute called this the worst consultation of 2017. In retrospect, what more will you do for these two vulnerable groups for another consultation? And you'll be aware that there's a lot of key consultations, not just with the Met, but with TfL coming forward. And I've been, and I'm sure every other Assembly member has had representation from both elderly people and disabled people, their concerns about whether this is real consultation or lip service consultation.
Well, I don't accept the criticism that you've suggested. I've already set out the improvements made between now and 2013. No draft equality impact assessment, no public consultation document published, no equality impact assessment. So huge progress made since 2013, but we can always improve. And that's why I'm pleased my Deputy Mayor met with the group you referred to, taken on board suggestions they had. We've got to get this right. Process matters. And so if there's lessons we can learn, I'm always happy to learn them.
So there's more to do. Would you reflect on that, please, and write to me? Because it's such an important point. I've got without going on to a different subject, we've got the Oxford Street consultation where, again, these issues are being raised to me and our Assembly members. It is how you actually listen and how you consult. And this is not a political point. It's about real consultation and not what happened in the past in 2013, but what happens in 2018.
And kind of similarly, any ideas you have, anybody has, we're really happy to receive as well. We don't pretend we have a monopoly on wisdom on consultation. So I know you know that Oxford Street area very well. If there's things we should be doing we aren't, please let us know offline. We're happy to do them.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Next question comes from Assembly Member Pigeon, and it's Bakerloo line extension.
Thank you for your
proposed stations.
Thank you for your question. I know your interest, long-standing interest in this. The Bakerloo line extension is absolutely vital to support population and employment growth in South East London. It will provide quicker, more direct journeys into Central London and reduce congestion on the rest of the network, including rail services into London Bridge. In spring 2017, TfL carried out a public consultation to help decide the best locations for the new stations. As part of this, a number of residents suggested that a new station at Bricklayers Arms should be reconsidered. This included Southwark Council, which supports a new tube station at the Bricklayers Arms. And TfL will take that into consideration, along with all the consultation responses when reaching any decision. The Bricklayers Arms site was initially proposed as a potential location for an emergency access and ventilation shaft. It was not considered a preferred option for a station, not least because it has less land available for construction and is relatively close to the existing tube stations at Elephant and Castle and Borough. TfL is now reviewing all the consultation responses and carrying out more work on possible station locations. This includes looking at a possible station at Bricklayers Arms. TfL will be looking at the benefits of the various options for local residents and wider users of the extension. TfL is also reviewing the shaft sites and requirements as it develops designs for the scheme. An initial response to the issues raised in the consultation, including the potential for a new station at Bricklayers Arms, is due to be published early 2018, hopefully January. A further update will be published in summer 2018 following the next stage of design work.
Well, thank you very much, and I welcome the Bakerloo line extension for all the reasons you give, and given there are 9 times as many tube stations north of the River Thames and south, it's long overdue that we improve tube connections in South East London. Under the current proposals, there is such a large distance between the Elephant and Castle and the first tube station on the Old Kent Road, so much so that, as you said, a ventilation shaft is being proposed at Bricklayers Arms. Given the gap between to the first new station would be around 2 kilometres, do you agree that that large distance between stations is unacceptable?
So you're right to remind us of the stations and shafts. So the current plans consulted on were 4 new stations with 3 shafts along the route. The challenge is each station costs hundreds of millions of pounds potentially, and so it's making sure we spend the monies we think we have sensibly. That includes distance time between stations, and so the TfL will respond early 2018, and hopefully they'll take on board some of the points made during the consultation process, bearing in mind, obviously, concerns around finances.
I understand that, but there's a huge cost installing a ventilation shaft, so in some ways you're part of the way there. I mean, do you think it's right that residents would potentially miss out on a much-needed station but have to put up with a huge ventilation shaft in their community? And
that's one of the concerns residents have raised. They are contributing towards a tube line and not directly benefiting because there's no station there. And a number of people have made points similar to that, but you'll be aware, I mean, the spending envelope we've got is £3.6 billion. In outruns, it could get to 4.6 billion. We're keen to make sure we spend within that envelope. I take on board the points you've made, as indeed others have as well.
Yeah, there is significant support for this new station from residents, local businesses, cross-party, Southwark councillors. And I'm not sure if you're aware, some of these sort of arguments that you're stating today, they were some of them that were used in the past when the Jubilee line extension was proposed, and people didn't want a station in Bermondsey and Southwark, but look what a success they've been and helped in those areas. So just would like just a firm assurance from you that TfL is fully investigating the proposal to have a Bricklayers Arms tube station and to look at how it can be delivered.
I can reassure you that the consultation is meaningful. They are considering that it was part of the responses we've received is a strong case for that. But I want to be quite candid and explain that actually additional stations on Old Kent Road do cost a lot of money. The figure I've been given is it could add hundreds of millions of pounds of additional costs to the extension. So with the context of the cost, of course, to take on board your points, which are well made.
Lovely, thank you. And then finally, I'm looking at another proposed station, the current second Old Kent Road station. Will you look at the merits of ensuring there's a proper interchange at this location with the London Overground line, which actually crosses nearby?
Yeah, now that you've mentioned it, I'll check that's happening, but a note's been taken, I'm sure, and I'll chase that up.
Okay, thank you very much. And I just want to add, as I have time left, goodness me, this is unusual, in terms of the distance, the 2 kilometre distance that I've highlighted to you, I just want to ask, are you aware that if you look at other parts of the tube network, normally the gap between stations, you know, I don't know, Marble Arch to Bond Street, it's 0.55 kilometres, Holland Park to Shepherd's Bush, 0.87 kilometres. So the idea that you'd have a 2 kilometre gap between the Elephant and Castle and the first station on this extension is really out of kilter with the rest of the network. And will you consider that as part of your considerations on whether we can have a station at the Bricklayers Arms?
Yeah, I mean, the TfL proposed two options for the location of the old Kent Road station. One, Sadiq, as I understand, prefer the Tesco Superstore site. TfL also proposed two options for Old Kent Road station. Option 2, and Sadiq prefer the Toys R Us location. So you'll appreciate when you move the plans for a station to go from one place to another, that has a knock-on impact on what the distance is to the next station. And so we'll have to make sure that if it is the case, for example, that TfL was to come back with an option of Bricklayers Arms, the knock-on impact that would have. But the points you made are points well made. It is an extension. It's a lot of money, so we want to make sure we use the money sensibly. We kick ourselves, like you said, if we had a situation like Jubilee Line where campaigning led to a station going where it otherwise wouldn't do, and we could have had a station here and we didn't. There is precedent in the Cross Line where Woolwich now is a cross-rail station because of lobbying in previous years, and so I take on board your points, which are well made. And bear in mind, the lines, the extension is due to be delivered by 28-29. I think there's time to get this right. So I'll make sure that I relay to TfL the points you've made, which are well made.
Lovely. Thank you very much for your commitment today. Thank you.
Yeah, let's move on to a question from Assembly Member Twycross, poverty in London.
Thank you for your question. I agree that this time of year can be very difficult for those not only living in poverty, but also for the elderly and other vulnerable people. Theresa May came into power promising to tackle injustice, improve social mobility and improve the lives of the poor. However, as the recent resignation of the entire Social Mobility Commission demonstrates, her government's focus has been catastrophically diverted from this commitment. This is not good enough for London or for the people of this country. I'm doing all I can to force the government to maintain its focus on vital issues such as the scale of poverty across the country and in London in particular. We know the disproportionate effect that welfare reforms introduced since 2010 have had on London, be it the 15,500 households currently having their income slashed by their benefit cap, the 2,500 tenants already at the risk of eviction, having moved onto universal credit, or simply the 1 million plus London households that have seen their incomes fail to keep track with the cost of living. The recent London poverty profile highlighted the alarming rise in the number of London households experiencing deep poverty. The powers and resources I have as mayor in this area are limited, but I have lobbied ministers to acknowledge and act upon the effect these policies are having in London. Most recently, I've written to the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to highlight the effect that the rollout of universal credits is having in London and the inadequacy of the measures announced at the budget. My housing strategy calls upon the government to reconsider the inadequate levels of financial support for private renters on low and middle incomes through the benefits system, which is fueling homelessness. I've secured £4.2 million for rough sleeping, including the social impact bonds, to provide intensive support to the 350 most entrenched rough sleepers this winter. And I'll be running a campaign this winter to highlight the support available to rough sleepers and to encourage Londoners to help. And I'll be working with boroughs to understand the effect that the rollout of universal credit is having on low-income families in London. I'm also taking action to address the root causes of poverty in London through promoting the London living wage, my new good work standard, increasing the provision of genuinely affordable homes, freezing TfL fares and continuing my hopper fare. And my fuel poverty action plan will also deliver heating and insulation measures, as well as supporting existing local fuel poverty support schemes to help more Londoners struggling with their energy bills.
Thank you. And thank you for writing to the Secretary of State, which is an issue that you mentioned a couple of Mayor's questions ago, so appreciate that. It's 75 years since the publication of the Beveridge report, and one of the things that sort of runs through the report is the notion, almost Beveridge's mantra, of the abolition of want, but yet 75 years later, although poverty might manifest itself in a slightly different way, there is still quite extreme levels of poverty that some people in London are experiencing. How long do you think it will be before we can see the abolition of want in London?
I think there's no one agency or one government branch that can solve this by themselves. And the bad news is there's no prospect from central government having the solutions to addressing the issue of want. I've got an announcement tomorrow which will take some steps towards stymieing the increase in rough sleeping. We've plateaued it over the last 12 months. It was going up over the last 8 years, doubling. By itself is not enough, though. Charities are working their socks off. 18 charities are working with me in the announcement tomorrow. Councils are working really hard, but without central government change of policy, I can't see a radical departure from where we are. And so ultimately, we'll need a change of government, and for that government to have time to turn things around.
Thank you. And food banks, as you know, have raised concerns that they'll run out of food this Christmas because the demand is likely to be so great because of the impact of some of the benefit changes, particularly the rollout of universal credit. What can be done and what can you do to help food banks ensure they have enough food and support this Christmas?
Well, I think all of us in this assembly have got social media outlets we can use to encourage the public to donate more. More than 90% of food that goes to food banks comes from the public. And so all of us ourselves should think about donating, but use social media outlets to encourage people to donate to their local food bank. The Trussell Trust does some remarkably good work around this. There are other organisations that are now helping. The Felix Project, we know about from the Even Standard. Fair Share as well, doing good work here. All of us can do things to help. The London Food Strategy from next year will be announcing plans to help in this area as well. But, you know, the bad news is there's an increased demand on food banks for the reasons you've outlined, that they're using up the stocks they have. And so all of us can help them backfill their stocks by donating to food banks.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Arnold. Her question is on knife crime.
Every death on the streets of London is an utter tragedy, and I'm deeply concerned about the rise in knife crime. It is worrying to note that knife crime has been increasing in London every year since 2014, and it's also increasing nationwide. We must look to address this across the country. Our knife crime strategy and public engagement campaign recognises and responds to the disproportionality which you're referring to. We know that in London, 77% of victims of knife crime are male and frequently aged less than 25 years of age. We also know that almost half of all the victims of knife crime are from BAME backgrounds, 90% of offenders are male, and of these, 62% were from BAME backgrounds. There have been 80 knife-related homicides between the 1st of January and 26th of November this year. 50 of the victims were from a BAME background. Those figures should shock us all. Our knife crime strategy has been structured to provide targeted responses and interventions to support our most affected young people, locations and communities, including the prioritisation of boroughs for additional support and seed funding. The police have regular operations targeting high knife crime areas to deter, prevent and detect crime using all the powers at their disposal, albeit with limited resources due to government cuts. I'm supporting the delivery of community-led solutions and delivering interventions at critical points to offer real opportunities to exit offending behaviour, as well as coming down hard on those who habitually carry knives. Our knife crime strategy commits to enable and empower communities who are most affected by knife crime through a number of interventions, which includes a £225,000 seed fund to work with young people within our priority knife crime boroughs. The London Needs You Alive knife crime campaign is a targeted campaign aimed at young people, communities and locations where knife crime is most prevalent. It's supported by influencers who we know have a large following from our young people who are most likely to be affected by knife crime. The campaign is also being supported by an anti-knife crime toolkit which provides prevention materials for all schools and community groups. This will be available early next year. This campaign is just one small element of our response to knife crime. I already fund a number of additional innovative programmes aimed at preventing and dealing with knife crime, including a £2 million gangs prevention programme, a 3-year youth intervention service in London's 4 major trauma centres, and a £1.5 million funding is also allocated to the London Gang Exit Programme to provide support to 300 gang members and those exploited by gangs. We must not and we will not give up on our valuable young people.
Thank you for that, Mayor, and thank you for just reminding us what's in the knife strategy, and I acknowledge that it was launched in June, so I'm not going to ask questions about that. But I just want to look at that whole issue relating to the fact that the victims and perpetrators are overwhelmingly from BAME backgrounds. And I think that's something that we must speak out about. And on looking at the rest of the UK demographics victim profile, I would say it's reasonable to argue that the difference cannot be explained away by socio-economic class, which tends to go with BAME populations. Because you could argue that there are plenty of working class white young men in London, and they are not being stabbed to death at anything like the rate of their black peers. So would you agree with me that alongside all the work that you're doing, and I know we're always asking for more, but I just do think maybe there's a piece of academic work or some piece of commissioning work that you need to do so that we can understand what is driving the disproportionality and how we can stop it alongside everything else you're doing. Will you consider that?
Absolutely, and can I just give you some news which you may know but you'll hopefully welcome, is the London Crime Prevention Panel will be meeting in January to discuss under the Justice Matters open session the issue of disproportionality. Sophie Linden and Matthew Ryder will chair that session because the bad news is, as far as victims of crime, as far as the stuff that David Lammy uncovered in his report, as far as vulnerability, there are too many Londoners from BAME backgrounds who are affected by this, and so part of the things we've got to do is look at the research. It's complicated. It's not as simplistic as some people would lead us to believe, and you're right to warn me of falling into the elephant trap of thinking there are simple explanations for this. It's not. It's complicated.
Well, I certainly would like to know more about that event and, if possible, attend. And I know that there's cross-party agreement on this. There's no difference. There's not any space between us and you on this one. And I'm just looking to see if I've got time, because I just wanted to just talk about the young people. And I'm talking young at primary age. At a recent hearing of the Home Office Home Affairs Select Committee, the Commissioner of Police, Cressida Sadiq, said, "I think there's a need to do more preventative work in schools with younger people." Just remind me, are you committed to ensuring that we actually go to primary schools? Because for so many of these issues that are impacting on the older age group, we're not dealing with the primary school age.
So let me tell you a story a school safety officer told me, Chair. He went to a primary school and he asked Year 6 pupils how many of them knew someone who carried a knife.
They all said yes.
And the number of hands that went up will shock some people. These are primary school children.
Yes.
So you're right, it's important, this prevention work, but I must also point out to you that the Commissioner went on to say during the Home Affairs Select Committee session that if the cuts carry on, her ability to do prevention work are reduced. And that's why you can't disaggregate the link between resources, prevention work, and keeping Londoners and others safe as well. Young people at an early stage need to understand if you carry a knife, you're less likely to be safe, more likely to be in danger. You're not cool, you don't earn respect, it's a foolish thing to do. And it means parents, carers, big brothers and big sisters, teachers, faith leaders, police officers, politicians, those involved in the music industry, those involved in social media, to all play a role in making sure we stop young people carrying knives.
Thank you, and it's a subject that I will keep coming back about, not to be in conflict with anybody about it, but so that we actually keep it at the top of the agenda in terms of what's happening in our city. Thank you.
Assembly Member Whittle.
Just carrying on from Assembly Member Arnold there, with the campaign London Needs You Alive, and I'm not talking about the various initiatives that you spoke about earlier, what are the components of it, the actual campaign?
So it's a public engagement campaign. I'm hoping none of you have seen it because you're the wrong demographic it's targeted at. And so it's gone wrong if you're receiving the videos and stuff. So the idea is it's part of a package of measures to prevention, stopping young people carrying a knife. to make them realise they've got huge potential and they're wasting it by carrying the knife. And so it's micro-targeted at those on Snapchat, those who are on certain types of Twitter. That age group doesn't use Facebook either. So the influencers that have been used in the public engagement programme are influencers that we may not have heard of, but young people have. And it's part of a package of measures, school safety officers, teachers, the toolkit we're talking about in relation to a model class, model lesson, to how to encourage young people not to carry a knife, but also if they know somebody carrying a knife, to discourage them to carry a knife as well. This peer-to-peer stuff is quite important.
Right, yes. So basically, it has lots of practical components to it as well.
Correct. So what we've done is we've worked with experts to bring up a toolkit which teachers can use in the classroom, because obviously most teachers haven't got the skill set, not sure what to say to young people, so it's a toolkit they can use.
Could I ask if the various churches around London have been in any way, have you communicated with them? Would they be part of this? Because they do a huge number of, a lot of pastoral work in these sorts of areas.
Absolutely, all faith communities, by the way, and so civic leaders, faith communities, all have a role to play. I mean, the phrase I've used a number of times is, it takes a village to raise a child, and so faith communities have a role to play, family role to play, schools have a role to play, FE colleges, but I think Assembly Arnold was right. If we catch them young,
yes,
that's half the battle done.
Sorry, I'm making hay while the sun shines. I've got 12 minutes today, sorry. What I just wanted to finish by asking is, you say start young, which is very important, but I think, and it's just, I'm talking very broadly here, that it's terribly important that mostly young men you talk to are not in some ways portrayed as victims. That masculinity is very important to them at that age, and basically a sense of honour and all of these things. And I think that that's got to be highlighted. I'm very pleased that it says London needs you, because it's going in the right direction. But I think that's the most important thing, not in some ways to see them as a sort of group that somehow or other got to be helped out of a situation. In other words, to actually really work to their sense of self-respect or what have you. I think this is crucial.
Can I say, if you've had a chance to see the short film, these aren't actors, they're real, genuine young Londoners involved in the film, and what was great was a lot of the ideas came from them, and I think part of that was the issue of respect.
Yes.
Don't talk down to them, which we tend to do because that's our experience with nephews and nieces and children, all the rest of it and stuff, and that we've been led to believe that's more effective in relation to changing attitudes, really important.
Okay, thank you, Raj.
Assembly Member Devonish, question on public land.
As we know, the London Land Commission published a public land register in 2015. However, there were a number of problems with the register. It included, for instance, 10 Downing Street as a brownfield site. This is why, since last year, my officers have been working to improve the register by adding outlines of sites rather than simple dots on a map, including thousands more additional sites, and beginning to remove those sites from the London Land Commission register that will never be developed, such as the British Museum, Regent's Park and the National Gallery. Such improvements will make it a lot more usable and easier to identify adjacent sites, and the register in this new format will go live in the new year. This will strengthen our understanding of public sector land holdings and also be accessible through the London website to anyone who wants this information. Beyond identifying public sector land holdings, we need to develop programmes of land to release for housing. Since last year, I've also ensured the GLA is working with public sector landowners regularly and directly to identify which sites are or can be made surplus. Clearly, a lot of potential development opportunities can only be realised following detailed feasibility work and decisions about the future operation of a public service. I understand that you have some experience in this area, Senator Devonish, so I'm happy for you to meet with my team if you have any ideas to make further improvements in this area.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You said in the new year. When will it be published, please?
I would be disappointed if it wasn't in January, but feel free to speak to me offline to just get a specific date, because I want it sooner rather than later.
Okay, well, you're
Thank
out
you.
of time
I've
now,
not got
so
12 seconds, actually.
No, you've got a second.
Minus 12 seconds. Sorry. I'm sorry.
Yes,
I can't read.
you're out of time. You've had a wonderful offer from the Mayor. Assembly Member Copley, Building Council Homes.
Thank you. The new draft London plan sets out how we need to build 65,000 new homes in London each year. This is roughly double what has been delivered in recent years. To boost housing supply to this degree, we will need far greater investment and far stronger powers in London. And at the heart of this, we will need a step change in the number of homes built by councils. As we all know, despite great ambition from many councils, national restrictions on what they can do has left recent delivery paling in comparison with London's long and proud history of municipal house building. In 1970 alone, councils delivered over 27,000 homes. In the 2 decades to 1980, they built nearly 2/3 of all new homes in London. Together, London government built the mixed communities that are still essential to our economic and social success today. This was abruptly ended by government in the 1980s. Although reforms in recent years to the housing revenue account system have given councils some greater freedoms to build again, meaning 1,800 homes have been built in London over the last 6 years from a standing start, councils have remained severely constrained by arbitrary national borrowing caps. Almost everyone agrees these caps should be scrapped. And when I heard the PM's speech to a party conference in October, I hoped that we might finally see this happen. Unfortunately, in the budget, the Chancellor failed to do so. Rather than freeing councils from arbitrary borrowing limits, councils in, and I quote, high-demand areas will have to go to the government for a slice of limited new allowances to invest in new houses, in new housing. The OBR itself has recognised that this bureaucratic approach will put councils off. It is forecasting that 20% of the earmarked money will be left unspent. On top of this, the budget failed to announce an extra penny of government grant for affordable housing, leaving current spending less than a fifth of what we really need. Londoners need government to do much better than this. Alongside the lifting of caps on council borrowing, they must provide significantly greater investment in affordable housing and infrastructure and give City Hall and councils powers to bring forward land so we can unlock a new generation of council house building and build a city that works for all Londoners.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I agree with you. The budget was a missed opportunity to do something about this, particularly given the wide consensus that you mentioned. I've written to the Chancellor asking that the cap is removed for all London boroughs, because I think it's absurd to suggest that any borough in London should prove that they're a high-demand area for housing. It's self-evident. Can you tell us what conversations or communication you've had with the Treasury about this since the very poor announcement?
So ahead of the budget, I wrote with 20 London councils lobbying the Chancellor on the grounds that you know about. Since the budget, my team has been engaging with Treasury civil servants, explaining the serious concerns about the cap. You're right, the whole of London is covered by the definition. The coalition government made a not dissimilar announcement, but the red tape led to not many councils utilising that, and the OBI themselves say they reckon there'll be a 20% underspend, and so we're lobbying the government to free up the bureaucracy. And of course, as and when there's any developments, I'll let the Assembly know.
Thank you. A report by the National Federation of Almos back in 2012 found that removing the HRA borrowing cap nationally for all councils would free up an additional 4.2 billion for new homes. Have you done any work, or are you aware of any work, which would determine how much extra investment will be raised if the HRA borrowing cap was lifted in London across the 29 stock-owning authorities that we have?
So London councils did some work a few years ago in this area. That was before the new rent settlement. So what we're going to do is we're speaking to London councils about them doing new work to build on the ALMO, the National Federation ALMO work that you talked about, because obviously the old work that London councils did is now outdated. So with the new work done, we're hoping to persuade the Treasury on why it makes sense.
Good, that's very welcome. And finally, I mean, the £1 billion, which is all this is that the government is putting towards partially lifting the borrowing cap, is very much in stark contrast to the £10 billion they're spending pumping up house prices with Help to Buy. Do you agree that they've got things the wrong way around, or do you think that if you were Chancellor, would you do it the other way? Would you put 10 billion into social housing and a little bit and less into Help to Buy?
They've got to deal with the supply side. They've got it wrong in relation to try and tweak the demand side, which leads to inflation in relation to homes that are being sold. And by the way, you mentioned £1 billion. The OBR says 20% of that won't be used up because of the red tape and the bureaucracy. So absolutely, they've got it the wrong way around. And what a good Chancellor would be doing is investing hugely in not simply affordable housing in London, but also freeing up councils who want to borrow prudentially, lift the HRA cap so they can do that. They've got their arms tied behind their back. They want to do it. Even things like allowing councils to swap the gap between the cap and the ceiling, so what Council A can use the the difference that other councillors got. There's simple things the government could do which won't cost much money, which will help the plight of London's homeless who need affordable housing.
Thank you.
I missed that. I didn't figure whether or not you actually wanted to be Chancellor or not, Mr Mayor. Assembly Member Whittle, which is the London Ambulance Service.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Can I begin by expressing my admiration and support for the paramedics and other staff at the London Ambulance Service who work tirelessly for Londoners, especially at this time of year when they can find themselves extremely stretched. The LAS is accountable to the Secretary of State for Health, who is responsible for providing a comprehensive health service. I meet regularly with the Chief Executive of the Ambulance Service to seek assurances that Londoners will receive the high-quality, timely services they need and deserve. If you're asking whether the London Ambulance Service should become a functional body of the GLA group, well, I'm not sure I support this idea, and my understanding is neither does the LAS. The Ambulance Service is part of the NHS. It is a provider of health services and also needs to maintain vital relationships and levers of influence within the NHS in order to improve patient handover times in acute trusts and develop alternative non-emergency care services. All that being said, it's critically important that the LAS works closely with London's other emergency services. There already are many shared initiatives that currently exist between the LAS, the Fire Brigade and the Met Police. These include a joint response unit between the London Ambulance Service and the Met Police in 12 boroughs where demand is very high, a dedicated team in the London Ambulance Service call centre to handle police calls, a new mobile communication system for blue light services in development, and corresponding between the LAS and the police in all London boroughs. The blue light services are also exploring closer collaboration on prevention and response activities, control rooms, back office and support functions, estate information and communication technology, and an air quality measure for fleets. And of course, all blue light services are represented at the London Resilience Forum, which enables those involved in emergency preparation and response to collaborate in planning and preparation for emergencies.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I take it from that you're not keen on the idea of it being brought here, as it were. I mean, it seems to me that it's a bit of an anomaly, really. You know, that we've got police under scrutiny here, we have the Fire Brigade, but the London Ambulance Service seems to lack scrutiny. There's a kind of democratic deficit there somewhere.
I mean, I'm not ruling it out. My concern is the fragmentation and the lack of joined-upness with the NHS. So none of us wants the NHS to become fragmented. No. But also, if you think about it, if we did that, we'd just be dealing with people taking patients from home to A&Es, and the LAS does a bit more than that, much more than that, and so I'm not sure that would resolve the challenges there are, because if you like, the London Ambulance Service deals with the symptoms of problems in the NHS, and I'm not sure if it addresses the mischief you're trying to address, which is a better London Ambulance Service, more accountability, better service for Londoners and patients in general. I was just thinking that obviously with increasing risks to London, we've seen this year, it would seem to be, it seems to make sense to, if you like, to regularise it with us. But if you're not something you want to do, that's a great pity. I would have thought, because we actually have talked about this on this Assembly before, I think James Cleverly did a report for the Tories about it. There was no recommendation made.
Mr Whittle, Assembly Member Whittle, you'll not be able to have an answer to this question because you're out of time, sadly.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I had a good old go today. So.
Let's move on to the next question from Assembly Member Prince on TfL business plan. Oh, you're out of time. And we have Assembly Member Gavron, who's withdrawn her question on the London plan. So we go on then to Assembly Member Cooper's question on autumn budget and diesel.
The government's budget did not announce any help for Londoners to clean up our toxic air. The budget made some very minor changes to vehicle excise duty and company car tax to discourage the purchase of more polluting vehicles and provided some further funding for air quality from the revenues of those tax changes. However, we asked for a vehicle scrappage fund to help low-income residents, charities and businesses to have the lowest emissions vehicles possible, or switch to cleaner alternatives to meet new emission standards being introduced across the country. The government failed to meet this request. Instead, the government committed only £220 million for a national clean air fund to support mitigation measures and approximately £255 million to help cities implement clean air zones like the ULEZ. Remarkably, London will not be able to access any of this funding. Instead, TfL is expected to shoulder the cost of implementing the ULEZ with no support from government. As a reminder, TfL will now receive no government subsidy, so air quality improvements are being paid for by public transport fare payers, putting pressure on investment in other infrastructure Londoners needs. The government is happily banking these efforts without contributing towards them, nor are they providing us with the additional powers or complementary national action that we have repeatedly requested. Most concerning of all, we now have a situation where Londoners not only have the highest pollution levels in the UK, and unlike residents of other cities, will receive no help from their government. This is despite Londoners contributing to the new Clean Air Fund through higher VED on sales of new diesel cars in London. This is unfair, unjust and unacceptable. With roughly 40% of the UK's roads which exceed legal limits being located in London, it would be reasonable to expect London to receive a share of any national funding available proportionate to the scale of the air quality challenge this city faces. This would equate to nearly £200 million in extra funding for London. I call on all members of the Assembly to stand up for London, to make the case to the government and help me secure this additional funding for Londoners.
Well, Mr Mayor, not surprisingly, I think you're as disappointed as I am that the government didn't take this opportunity to try and support the work that you've been doing in London to try and improve and clean up London's dirty and filthy toxic air. Do you think it's also fair on the boroughs across London that they are being expected to take on the rollout of electric vehicle charging infrastructure at a time when the government has also been imposing austerity cuts on their budgets? And what more can we do to support them?
Well, can I just commend the local authorities across London facing tough cuts imposed upon them by central government, but trying to do the right thing in relation to air quality in these difficult times. We've secured funding for helping local authorities, £5.2 million for installing residential and £2.3 million for car clubs. And we've 25 boroughs have now secured this funding from us, from this pot. And so you'll see some installations beginning very shortly, which is really important across London. We've also seconded an officer to help London Council to help them in relation to this. What we're doing in relation to helping local authorities is to try to persuade the government. There's a bill going through Parliament, which I know you are well aware of, the Autonomous and Electric Vehicles Bill. What we're saying to the government is you can help councils fast-track planning by giving permitted development rights for the rapid charging points, which speed things up. Also helping councils in relation to the installation of rapid charging points by parking spaces. So there are things the government can do aside from more resources, but I'm not one to criticise local authorities faced with tough decisions because of cuts made upon them by central government. Many Londoners won't realise, but we're one of the most centralised democracies in the Western world. Local authorities actually get most of their money from central government, and so they're trying to do the right thing in these tough times.
Yes, for all the song and dance that people make about council tax, it does only cover about 5% of local authorities' services. Given the increase in commercial vehicles on London's roads, are you concerned that the government are not targeting those vehicles which are the main polluters that are causing much of our poor air quality and also elsewhere in the country, obviously, as well?
London diesel drivers are paying higher road taxes towards a scheme we can't benefit from.
We can't benefit. I suppose there's absolutely no news at all about any kind of Clean Air Act and the additional powers.
Well, I've seen the Secretary of State in this department has been posing in the media for the good work he's doing around animal welfare, and I commend him for the work Michael Gove's doing around animal welfare. It'd be great if Michael Gove did some work around clean air as well, not simply to respond to a legal challenge, but because we can be the generation of politicians who passed the Clean Air Act for the 21st century, walking behind those in the 1950s who passed the Clean Air Act in 56, which cleaned up the air in London, the Great Smog. We can be that generation that cleans up the air in London as well. And my plea to Michael Gove and the current government is, look, let's just seize this and pass the Clean Air Act, because we're the best one in the world. All the stuff we're doing, more than any city in the world, will only deal with that half of the pollution caused by transport. What about housing? What about the River Thames? What about construction? What about making sure we've got a replacement for when we leave the EU? Who's going to be in charge of enforcement? Who's going to be in charge of compliance? Who's going to be in charge of monitoring once we leave the EU? There's a reason and a justification for a new Clean Air Act, and I just hope Michael Gove would seize the initiative.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Then let's then go to Assembly Member Twycross, Industrial Strategy.
Thank you for the question. I support the UK Government's overall approach to the industrial strategy and look forward to producing London's own industrial strategy and to working with cities across the UK to support key growth sectors and maximise economic opportunity across the country. London, however, faces long-standing challenges around inequality, which are not fully addressed in the Industrial Strategy White Paper. In addition to huge challenges post-Brexit, where further devolution of powers and funding are a requisite if London is to continue its significant contribution to UK growth. London has specific infrastructure challenges that will need addressing, such as ensuring access to charging points for electric vehicles, we've just talked about. As London grows, so does the rest of the country. Diverting resources for vital infrastructure from the capital will undermine London's international competitiveness. Investors will look to other global cities, is my fear. The loss of this investment will damage the national economy, and there can be no doubt about that. The anti-London stance from the government is reflected in the budget, which clearly fails to deliver the funds the capital desperately needs to fix the housing crisis, keep London safe, tackle toxic air pollution and invest in infrastructure. My approach to the industrial strategy is set out in my draft economic development strategy, which was published yesterday. London needs further devolution in order to support innovation and business growth across London's key growth sectors and help Londoners to access those opportunities.
Thank you. Do you think the government is entirely ignoring Brexit, or have they taken it into account when they've been developing the strategy?
The behaviour of David Davis over the last few weeks is the best answer to your question. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, you'd expect a government to carry out, or have carried out for them, impact assessments on the various scenarios in relation to the outcomes of discussions with the EU. Are we going to leave the EU, but be in the single market? Are we going to leave the EU, be in the single market and customs union? Are we going to leave the EU and be in neither, and on? And David Davis gave the impression the government had undertaken various impact assessments in the various sectors that are responsible for the jobs and growth in our country. It now transpires, I think, that no assessments were carried out by the government. Look, what I've done as a consequence is to ask independent experts, Cambridge Econometrics, to carry out impact assessments in the 9 different sectors that create the most jobs in London: finance, construction, hospitality, care. And I've asked them to let me know the impact of the various possibilities with negotiations with the EU. They hope to respond in January, and you know what, when they do, I'm going to publish them.
Fabulous, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go to question from Assembly Member Copley, TfL Business Plan.
Thank you for your question. The TfL Business Plan delivers on my priorities for London. It sets out a bold agenda for delivering on the aims of my transport strategy over the next 5 years, improving the health and quality of life for all Londoners and providing an easy-to-use, affordable and accessible public transport system. It shows how TfL will deliver my pledge to prioritise people, their health and their experience of being in London in everything we do. The plan contains significant investment in streets, making them more pleasant places and improving the quality of London's air. We'll be investing a record £2.2 billion in street schemes and initiatives, including major schemes like Old Street Roundabout, Highbury Corner, and of course the transformation of Oxford Street. We'll be opening the Elizabeth line in 2018, adding 10% capacity to the rail network. Tube upgrades will provide 33% more capacity on the Circle, District, Hampstead City and Metropolitan lines. We'll complete the extension of the overground to Barking Riverside and begin work on our deep tube programme to upgrade the Piccadilly line. In the next 5 years, we'll complete major station upgrades in Victoria and Bank, two of the busiest, most crowded stations in the Tube, and at Bond Street, and begin work at Camden and Holborn stations. I'm committed to making London's transport more accessible, and this plan includes record levels of investment in step-free access. By 2022, at least 30 more stations will be fully step-free. This is in addition to the Elizabeth line, which will also be step-free when it opens fully in 2019. My Hopper fare has been hugely successful in its first year, and I've pushed TfL so that from early next year, customers will be able to make unlimited bus or tram transfers within the hour. I'll achieve this all while keeping my commitment to freeze TfL fares and protect travel concessions so that travel stays affordable for all Londoners. This is in stark contrast to the previous mayor and the government, which continues to hike up national rail fares. We've worked hard to develop a plan that maintains investment despite the removal of government funding. My fares freeze is helping to keep passenger numbers up, protecting TfL revenues from this significant fall in usage that has been reported on the national rail network.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There's much to welcome in there, but I want to raise the matter of the bus network with you. Last year's business plan showed that you were aiming to have a bus service volume of 497 million kilometres for every year of the business plan. But your new business plan shows you plan to cut this provision of bus services by 10%. How will you ensure there is not a deterioration of the bus service given such a dramatic reduction in bus mileage?
What we're doing is we're reconfiguring the buses from the central to the outer. If you look at central London, part of the work that Will Norman is doing is encouraging more people to walk and cycle. And actually, TfL is doing something that a private business will never do, which is we're losing revenues by encouraging people to walk and cycle. It could be argued the more people use public transport, more revenues we gain. But actually, we realise for a healthy city, the more people who walk and cycle, the better for our city. So in central London, more walking and cycling, healthy streets, Oxford Street pedestrianisation. The Elizabeth line will lead to people coming to Oxford Street, that part of London, using that rather than buses. We're moving the bus network more to outer London and the suburbs, where there'll be additional housing in relation to meeting the needs of Londoners. So what we're doing is changing bus routes based upon the needs of Londoners. And the final piece of the jigsaw is from early next year, unlimited bus travel within an hour. So people can jump on and jump off. So some of the routes that we currently have in central London, we hopefully won't need.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I still want to press you on the issue of the 10% cut. I mean, it's right that you've highlighted the fact that you're trying to move bus services out of central London, but can you satisfy residents in outer London with a 10% cut in bus mileage?
10% is across Greater London. By the end of the 5-year business plan, there'll be an increase of 1% in bus kilometres in the whole of London. What people in outer London will see is more buses in outer London, more routes in outer London. You will see a reduction of bus services in central London. Already at Oxford Street, we've had a huge reduction in buses there. I think 40% less buses there.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chair. Obviously, the great improvements in Putney High Street since we've put the cleaner buses started in March, and the most recent launch this week of the cleaner bus routes through Brixton. Even when we see the fully expanded ULEZ, the beefed up ULEZ coming in, there are still going to be some hotspots beyond that central area. And I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about how we're planning to deal with hotspots, Tooting Broadway being one, Heathrow being another, there's some in Kingston and Croydon Town Centre and so on and so forth. If you could give us some idea, because obviously there is still dirty air outside of that even expanded ULEZ zone.
So the 12 ultra-low emission bus zones I announced are the sum of the work we're doing to clean up the air. We chose the 12 ultra-low emission bus zones because they were outside central London, because they had the worst air, but our buses were contributing to the bad air. In less than 6 months in Putney, we've seen, as a consequence of that being the first low-emission bus zone, of the hourly breaches, 90% reduction, the amount of NOx reduced by 40%, and I was really pleased this week, although it was freezing, to be in Brixton for the launch of the second low-emission bus zone. But don't forget, it's not simply the areas within which the buses operate which get the benefits. These buses go outside those areas as well. So they'll receive the benefits of the ultra-low emission zone from subject to consultation. So the ULEZ comes to Central London in 2019. All the buses in the ULEZ area will be Euro 6 compliant, cleaner buses. They also go outside of Central London. Subject to consultation, 2020, the entire London will be covered ULEZ for buses, coaches and lorries. That will lead to a big improvement in air. We'll do a number of measures, low-emission neighbourhoods, low-emission bus zones to clean up the air in the hotspots you referred to. That includes the healthy streets that Wall Norman and Val Shawcross are working on. A lot of the healthy streets work is outside of central London to encourage cleaner environment in those parts of London you referred to.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And perhaps I could write to you then about some of the detail of how that fits together, because people are contacting me, obviously, with my Environment Committee hat on and very keen to know more. Thank you.
Sure,
Okay.
of course.
Assembly Member Eshalomi.
Just still with the business plan, Mr. Mayor, I'm sure you'll be aware of Monday's tragic accident on the South Circular near the Tulse Hill Gyratory, where a young woman lost her life, where two trucks and 2 cars ran over her and no one stopped. In the last business plan, your predecessor did look at this, and my predecessor, Val Shawcross, was also looking at the Tulse Hill Gyratory. And in that business plan, your predecessor did state that the Tulse Hill Gyratory will be included in the 10-year business plan, which is currently scheduled for delivery in 2020-2021. Following Monday's tragic accident and an accident earlier this year in February as well, can you update me on when this scheme will be delivered, and is it still going to be delivered by 2020-2021?
So firstly, I know your thoughts are, but I think that's all of our thoughts are with the poor woman who lost her life as a consequence of the accident in Tulse Hill earlier this week. So the current plan is as you say, but I'm very happy for you to meet with Val to see if we can accelerate that. Because actually, although the Vision Zero work we're doing will lead to huge improvements going forward, what's clear to me from the reports I've read, this is a hotspot that needs addressing. Yeah. So, Chair, could I, through you, undertake to arrange for the Deputy Mayor to meet with the Assembly Member to discuss this particular case, see if we can expedite matters?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's move to the next question from Assembly Member Desai, acid attacks and preventative policing.
Let me be clear, acid attacks are a truly horrendous crime, one that gives victims a life sentence of trying to recover from the mental and physical damage that act has been inflicted on them. Well, there's no place on the streets of our city. The initial response to an acid attack can be vital in minimising the harm caused to the victim, and the Met have therefore rolled out acid attack response kits to over 1,000 police cars and key patrol points across London. More recently, they've also supplied these kits to security industry authority staff working at Christmas markets across the city. The kits include large bottles of water, gauntlets and goggles which enable responders to safely administer initial treatments to victims in the aftermath of an attack. The Met and NHS have also set out a 3-step model to inform the public of what to do in the event of an acid attack. Remove contaminated clothing carefully, rinse skin immediately in running water, report the attack, dial 999. The acid testing kits which you refer to in your question are different. They were trailed in East London and consisted of litmus paper and colour charts with the aim of proactively deterring potential offenders. However, they were not as effective as the Met would have hoped, with inaccuracies in some results, and as a consequence they are not being rolled out more widely. Preventing attacks using corrosive substances and improving the response are priorities for the police, and offer my full support to them in dealing with these horrendous crimes. And I'm pleased that the government listens to our calls and those of Assembly members to strengthen current legislation and policies on this. I'm also pleased to see the government has responded by releasing a proposal to ban on the sale of acids to anyone under the age of 18. It's vital that those measures move forward and are enshrined into law. I should be clear that acid attacks represent a small but extremely concerning proportion of offences in London.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you mentioned, the sale of acid attacks, the sale of acid to underage is something we welcome. But there is something that does concern me, and that is that they're ignoring online sales. So just like with the sale of knives, would you agree that in order to be more effective, the legislation relating to acid should also stipulate that acid bought online must be picked up in person at a local store, which can then carry out an ID and age checks, so to ensure that the product is not sold to under 18s?
I agree, and this will help the police and the trading standards as well.
Absolutely.
Similar legislation for knives.
I've written to the Home Office urging them to do this. There was a consultation which finished last Friday. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Apologies to Assembly Member Russell. I flipped my page over. I'm going to call you now, but can I just ask the Assembly to agree to suspend Standing Orders 2.98b in accordance with the provision, so we can get... Yep, thank you. Assembly Member... Mayor, can we have an answer to a question from Assembly Member Russell? Burning waste. Thank you.
Thank you. In my draft London Environment Strategy, I've been clear that I do not think we should be burning any more waste in London. It is only squandering valuable resources that could be reused in the economy. It also emits pollutants that can contribute to London's toxic air and carbon emissions that cause climate change. The best way to prevent more waste going to incineration in London is to reduce the waste we produce in the first place and significantly increase our recycling rates. That's why my draft London Environment Strategy has set a London-wide target to recycle 65% of London's waste by 2030, with a target for local authorities to recycle 50% of the waste they collect by 2025. I also want to see zero biodegradable or recycling waste to landfill by 2026. There is some good news. Government stats released last week showed that in 2016 and 17, London's household recycling went up by 1% to 33%, the first year London's experienced an increase since 2011, and household waste produced per person is the lowest of all regions in England. But to reach the 65% recycling target, we still have some way to go. That's why I proposed in my draft London Environment Strategy that all London boroughs should collect the 6 main recyclables from all curbside properties and flats where practicable, as well as have separate food waste collections. Through the London Waste and Recycling Board's Resource London programme, I'm providing up to £9 million from 2017 to 2020 to support the authorities to provide better recycling services, especially in flats. And where incinerators have already been built or were approved before I came to office, I want them to be as efficient as possible. Proposals for refurbished waste incineration facilities would need to meet strict air quality criteria set out in my draft London Plan for Developments, and my draft London Environment Strategy has set a carbon intensity floor that requires all waste that goes to energy from waste plants to be genuinely residual and non-recyclable. In addition, I want all of London's facilities to use waste heat as well as the electricity produced, as this will help contribute towards my goal for London to become a zero-carbon city by 2050.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And it's good that the recycling rate has gone up by 1%, but it's come down an awful lot over the last few years. Back in 2010, Wandsworth was up at 26.8%, and last year they were at 21.9%. So there's all over London, there is a long way to go on our recycling levels. The Western Riverside Waste Authority boroughs, that's Lambeth, Wandsworth, Hammersmith and Fulham and Kensington and Chelsea, found their recycling rates dropped significantly once they started to use the Belvedere incinerator in 2012. This suggests that there is a risk that incineration is keeping recycling levels down. Now, the South London Waste Partnership boroughs, that's Kingston, Croydon, Merton and Sutton, are going to start to use the new Viridor incinerator in Sutton next year. So what will you do if the same thing happens and their recycling rates drop once they start to use the Viridor incinerator?
Well, I'm not sure why there's a link between the incinerator and the recycling rates dropping. Maybe it's a perverse incentive, so I'm happy to look into the point you raised and maybe speak to my Deputy Mayor about what we can do about that. I've been quite welcoming of the partnership between Merton, Kingston and Croydon in relation to the partnership approach they're doing of procuring the waste treatment contract and waste collection contract together. So now that you've warned me about what could happen, why don't I speak to the 4 councils to make sure we don't inadvertently reach a position that you refer to with Belvedere?
That would be very helpful. And obviously I realise none of us can predict what might happen, but if it does,
I take your point, yeah.
You do have the power to direct a waste authority which is not in general conformity with your policies and targets. So if the recycling rates of the South London Waste Partnership boroughs fall once the Viridor incinerator is on stream, will you consider using your powers of direction to get them to boost their recycling?
Hopefully we won't get there because you've told me about it, so we'll look into it. And so we don't want to get there, but you're right. As a last resort, we do have tools in the toolkit which we can be used. And the local authorities know this and they can be reminded of this. But because you've alerted me to a precedent, which is not a good one, let's speak to them and see what we can do.
Okay, but as a last resort, you would push them.
I hope I wouldn't need to.
Okay. This morning I visited Biocollectors, which is an anaerobic digester plant for food waste in Mitcham, with Assembly Member Cooper. Biocollectors raised their concern that your draft environment strategy proposal for zero waste, specifically no biodegradable or recyclable waste being sent to landfill by 2026, is not tough enough. They are worried that incinerators are burning food waste that should be being anaerobically digested to produce biogas and liquid fertiliser. So will your final environment strategy and London plan say that not only should no biodegradable or recyclable waste be sent to landfill, but also that this unavoidable food waste should be collected and separated so it can be anaerobically digested to prevent unnecessary burning?
Well, look, why don't you respond to the draft consultation? It is a consultation.
I have already, and I did say that.
Can I say, that's one of my concerns about the push towards waste to energy, that there's a perverse incentive to try and do that for the reasons you've said, because of residual benefits. That's why I'm not as keen an advocate as some people are because of the reasons you say. But please respond to the consultation. Ask the company you referred to respond as well, and we'll look into the specific points you raise.
Okay, and there's one other problem, which is that boroughs are not separating enough food waste from recycling and residual waste. Biocollectors said the second most useful thing that they thought you could do would be to set a policy to ensure that all food waste that is separated and sent for anaerobic digestion is actually treated in London so that we reduce the amount of lorry movements and things, that it's possible to have that capacity in London. So will you consider that?
I smile because it seems like a self-serving suggestion from that company.
Oh, of course, no, I appreciate that, but they're not talking about themselves. I mean, other companies can exist.
They're lobbying for other
just
companies to make profit, are they?
It is much better to anaerobically digest food waste than it is to incinerate it in terms of our environment and carbon emissions, etc.
Well, listen, we'll see what we can do to increase the amount we don't send to the incinerator, so happy to look into that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, Assembly Member Russell and I went down to my constituency to visit Biocollectors this morning, which I've visited previously. And I think what's really encouraging is that the draft environment strategy talks about separating the 6 main recyclables and encouraging the separation of food waste. And RAP has made it absolutely clear in all their reports that once people start to separate, the actual amount goes down. And I think that the concern about potential issues relating to the South London Waste Partnership probably is one step behind the possibility of us encouraging people, if they have break clauses at the moment with their arrangements for sending material to Belvedere, to exercise a break clause and take the food waste out. For example, Wandsworth does not segregate food waste, and I suspect that might be to do with why the figures have gone down for the Western Riverside Waste Authority, and there are some problems in East London with the Shanks contract. Would you ask the Deputy Mayor for Energy and Environment to work closely with those boroughs over how they can most effectively exercise break clauses so that we can start to get more food waste into the anaerobic digesters that are available in London? And evidence to our waste inquiry at the Environment Committee has shown that they are all underused.
Can I suggest that I ask my Deputy Mayor to speak to London councils about what advice and guidance London councils can give to these councils, and us providing them with the expertise that we have, firstly. Secondly, one of the reasons why we're providing £9 million to the London's waste authorities is to help them with recycling, especially in flats. I suspect part of the reason why there's a reduction in recycling is because there's more flats now, proliferation of flats, and there's less curbside facilities available and stuff. So that's one of the reasons we're trying to help local authorities in curbside recycling in flats. So happy to take up your suggestion, and that's what I'll probably ask Shirley to do, to speak to London councils, see how we can help those, providing those councils with help in relation to question, are there break clauses, can they look into the contracts they currently have?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Okay, thanks for that. Next question comes from Assembly Member Sahota.
Thank you. The groundbreaking devolution agreement, which I agreed with the Secretary of State, Jeremy Hunt, London councils, the NHS and public health and wider health and care leaders will bring health and care services closer together, localising decision-making to London to bring improvements to the services Londoners receive. It is a really important step in the right direction in our journey to becoming the world's healthiest global city. In future, NHS in London will be incentivised to sell unused land and buildings. It is one of the largest landowners in London, with money reinvested in health and care, community and public services. Surplus land will be available to develop more housing. The London Health Board, which I chair, is the body which will provide political oversight of the developments in health and care across the city. With respect to King's Fund report and the 6 assurances that I set out, I've accepted the recommendations for me to provide system leadership to sustainability and transformation partnerships. To this end, my mayoral health advisor, Dr. Tom Coffey, and GLA officers are currently discussing with STP leaders and the wider NHS the options to secure their commitment to ensuring greater democratic transparency of the proposed implementation plans.
Well, Mr. Mayor, first of all, I want to congratulate you for commissioning the report from King's College Fund, because this is the first time we're looking objectively what's happening in London, rather than the previous mayor saying, I've been informed X, Y, Z. So I congratulate you for that. But of course, the challenge, of course, is that this report is very critical of what's happening right across London. And of course, you have asked for 6 assurances. And I want to know that if those assurances aren't being given to you, what can you do about it? What will you do about it? And whilst the STPs are being questioned, the CCGs are still implementing some of the direction of travel of those STPs already. And so damage is being done right as we speak, right across London. And I just want to know what you want to do. Now you have a report on your desk.
Well, a number of things. Firstly, we can't run away from the fact that the NHS in London is underfunded by £4.1 billion. Secondly, one of the reasons why many people believe STPs are making the decisions they are is to save money. But thirdly, their plans don't equate to the projections with our population and the needs we've got as a city. So I've made it quite clear to STPs that I can only support their plans if they satisfy the 6 assurances. The good news is some of the STPs are now undertaking refreshes in light of the King's Fund report, and I'd encourage all the STPs to refresh what they're doing in light of the King's Fund report. They say to us that they're already doing some of these things. For the interest of transparency, they should do it sooner rather than later and let people know.
I mean, one of the worst STPs is in North West London, in my patch of the world, and they are refreshing. Of course, we know the boroughs of Ealing and Hammersmith and Fulham haven't signed up to those STPs. So we need to, I really want to try to push you on this, that if they don't do this refresh, what other things can you take?
Well, I mean, we won't support their plans. And as the Mayor of London, as somebody who's chair of the Health Board, that will carry a lot of weight. I meet regularly with the person in charge of NHS London and NHS England, Jane Cummins. She will understand our views in relation to this. But a good STP understands that if they want to serve the community, they need to take key stakeholders with them, including councils. So I'd be disappointed if STPs ignored the 6 assurances set out by the King's Fund.
Well, thank you for Mr. Mayor. And the other thing, of course, is that the London Health Board is a very important body through which you want to do extra scrutiny work and also make sure you give leadership to London. One of the criticisms of the Health Board has been that it's not transparent. Can you tell us what you want to do to make it more transparent, please?
So I know these guys don't like talking about the previous administration, but before I was the Mayor, no minutes published, no records kept publicly of what the Health Board was doing. They've got sort of selective amnesia. So we're now publishing the minutes of all Health Board meetings, and we're looking towards how we can make it even more transparent, because it's not acceptable for men and women to meet in closed rooms, make decisions that no one knows about. So we're trying to see how we can be more transparent as we go forward.
Great. Well, that'd be very helpful, Mr. Mayor, and I look forward to seeing it become much more transparent.
Thank you. Assembly Member, last question from Assembly Member Shah, Cancer Care.
Thank you for raising this important question. I applaud Macmillan for publishing this research and for the excellent services they continue to provide for London, as many of us have friends and family who've used their services, and they're a remarkable service. The findings of the National Care Patient Experience Survey are concerning. Everyone should be entitled to the same level of healthcare no matter their ethnicity or where they live. Last month we hosted a Macmillan-led event at City Hall where we launched the London Cancer Community Campaign. As I made clear when launching the campaign, by working together with excellent organisations such as Macmillan, we can help to raise awareness and tackle inequalities in care that are far too prevalent in London today. Unfortunately, in terms of delivery of cancer services, my powers and responsibilities are very limited. That's the reason we haven't focused my health inequality strategy on patient experience or access issues. These are the responsibility of the Secretary of State for Health. It's his statutory duty. However, I do regularly meet NHS leaders, including Professor Jane Cummins, the new Regional Director at NHS England, who I met last month, and we discuss a range of issues relating to NHS performance. I'm informed that most of the trusts are not meeting the national cancer targets, and Jane Cummins and the Health Commissioners are funding cancer improvement programmes in order to address this. My health officers will be monitoring progress. I know the NHS welcomes the Macmillan Survey publication and are working with them to improve both the experience and outcomes of BAME patients, as well as those in deprived areas who are living with cancer. I should add that the cancer survival rates in this country are the highest they've ever been. There have been huge improvements in the last 15 years, and I take my hat off to the frontline doctors and nurses who have made this possible. Cancer service provision is the responsibility of the Secretary of State for Health, and I repeat that all of us, including the London Assembly, should keep pressurising the government to properly fund the NHS and to tailor cancer services to deliver a consistent service to Londoners regardless of their ethnicity or where they live.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that you have constraints in terms of the responsibility you have in this area. But like you said, the survey findings are extremely worrying. Question is there any way you can have figures, any data available borough-wide across London to measure the scale of the problem? And if there are any such figures available, whether within your health and inequality strategy, you can put in some measures to see how those problems can be addressed through whatever agencies joined up working, etc., and the outcome based on those measures as well.
So when I received your question, I asked for the data for London-wide, and you're right, we don't hold it. It's not held in City Hall. It's held by NHS England. So as a consequence of the concerns you've raised, I will ask NHS England for the data they have for London, because I think this information is crucial for us to look at where the patterns are in the communities that all of us know. And this isn't a party political point. What this survey uncovers is areas of deprivation, areas where there's high BAME populations are receiving a less good service than they should. And you see the innovations in science and how brilliantly the NHS doctors, clinicians, nurses work. That's not acceptable. And as soon as I receive that, I'll pass it on to all Assembly members.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that. Given that this is the last question, we've got plenty of time left, so all that remains for me to say is to wish you a Merry Christmas and also wish you a very happy and special New Year. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, follow that on, and thank you, Mayor, for your answers to the questions that have been placed on the order paper. Yes, what is it?
We've still got time, Chair.
Okay.
And I've put my hand up and indicated.
Okay, Assembly
Thank you very
Member
much.
Duval.
Thank you very much. We will use our time. Given the answers that you've given, Mr. Mayor, and given the focus that you can bring to the attentions that Assembly Member Shah brought up, do you not think it is time on the devolution agenda that we could be part of the NHS, and rightly so, a national NHS, but in London we need to democratise it, because there's something wrong when the focus isn't always there on tackling the difficult issues. And I'm aware of the challenges that you've said about the underfunding of the NHS and maybe the difficult decisions, but actually I'd feel safer as a London resident if it wasn't just left to national government or a quango such as NHS England looking after the interest of London and taking decisions for Londoners. What do you think about that? Where are you standing on that issue? Specifically when we have issues like the cancer care being highlighted and some of the inadequacies of their decision making.
It's a really good question. Recently I hosted a meeting in City Hall with all the metro mayors across the country, and it was a very productive meeting. And one of the issues raised by the Metro Mayor for Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, was some of the piloting work they're doing around health and social care. And they've had good conversations with the government in relation to pooling the budgets. So if you think about it, we still work in silos. Social care's here, health care's here. there's a separate issue about democratic deficit, and Assembly Whittle referred to the LAS in relation to who they're accountable to. And question, should they be accountable to a civil servant in NHS England, as good as she may be, to the Secretary of State who's juggling so many balls all parts of the country, or to City Hall, who've got a bird's eye view of London, know the areas, understand the issues. And I mean, you'd expect us to say this, wouldn't you? But the view from the Metro Mayors, of all parties, by the way, the majority Conservative Metro Mayors, was we need more devolution. Now, there's a separate conversation about fragmentation of the NHS. I think you can still keep a National Health Service, but more accountability. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So, for example, you could have the NHS centrally deciding what needs to be done, but us deciding how it's done. And you just think about the concept of, and it's a horrible phrase, but bed blocking. So you will be aware of the issue of, because of social services cuts, people sometimes have to stay longer in hospitals because local authorities can't provide them with safe places. They're different budgets. And so arguably it's not in one person's interest to help the other. And so that's where we can help in relation to City Hall, the Mayor, the Assembly, that sort of devolved route, on top of the point you made about democratic deficit.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, I can thank you, Mr Mayor, for your answers to the question.
Chair, could I just beg your indulgence for 30 seconds?
It's okay. We're going to finish this meeting sometime tonight. Yes.
Can I just say this, Chair, which is we've had a tough year as a city, and can I just thank the Assembly for your hard work over the last 12 months, and I wish you all a happy Christmas and a good break.
And the same to you, Mr Mayor. Thank you. Okay, Part B. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the motion which is set out on the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked? Agreed. Part 6. Date and time of the next meeting. The next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly will be the plenary meeting, which will take place at 11 a.m. on Thursday, the 21st December 2017. This meeting will principally be used to hold a question and answer session with the Mayor and the Metropolitan Police Commissioner on policing in London. Any other business the Chair considered urgent? There are none. Wish you all a good Christmas. Peace and love to everybody. Bye.
GLA Chamber Sound.